Chapter 497. The Dao Law. Yi Xian arrived at the second level. The Dao of Dreams was still there. Amongst the three Dao laws, only the Dao of Dreams hadn't been grasped. The reason he hadn't touched the Dao of Dreams in the past was because his strength hadn't been sufficient. He wasn't confident in his ability to control it. But now he wanted to give it a try. His current strength wasn't just a little bit stronger than it was in the past. Yi Xian walked towards the Dao of Dreams. Meanwhile, the Dao of Dreams suddenly trembled slightly. When Yi Xian arrived before it, he suddenly drew his sword and swung it. A ray of light slashed down. Crack. Something seemed to have collapsed here. His sword descended, but Yi Xian was still standing before the Dao of Dreams, and the Dao of Dreams wasn't affected at all. Meanwhile, Yi Xian swung his sword again. Just like that, Yi Xian drew his sword 10 times before he stopped. It was a dreamscape. He'd unknowingly fallen into a dreamscape as soon as he entered it. Moreover, it wasn't just a single dreamscape, it was 10. Even though he'd overcome the dreamscape, Yi Xian still felt quite fearful. It was very terrifying. He'd experienced how terrifying the Dao of Dreams was in the past, and it was very likely for the Dao of Dreams to silently kill him in his dreams. Even now, he still maintained 120% vigilance, because he was afraid that the slightest mistake would cause him to fall to the Dao of Dreams. A short while passed before Yi Xian grabbed at the Dao of Dreams with his right hand. In the end, he decided to subdue it by force. It was impossible for such a treasure to make the other party willingly submit to it. He'd do it by force. As soon as Yi Xian grabbed, the Dao of Dreams suddenly transformed into a ray of light that entered the center of Yi Xian's forehead. Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, but he noticed that he was completely fine. What's going on? Yi Xian's brows knit together tightly. He glanced at the surroundings and it was very calm. Another dreamscape? When he thought up to this point, he suddenly swung his sword. His sword flashed. A strand of light flashed, but the surroundings were still extremely calm and didn't seem strange at all. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and calmed himself down. After a while, his sword was spread out in all directions. This time he no longer looked at the world with his heart, but with his sword intent. Because the heart can sometimes lie. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. Under the perception of his sword intent, everything around him seemed so real. However, the more it was so, the more solemn his expression became. He did not believe that the Dao of Dreams would submit to him so easily. After a long time, Yi Xian left the World Prison Pagoda and returned to the stone house. At this time, Yiling walked over. Just like before, Yiling quickly walked in front of him and pulled his arm, giggling, "Brother." Yi Xian was silent. Yiling asked softly, "What's wrong, brother?" Yi Xian led Yiling out of the stone house. Outside the stone house, everything seemed so normal. However, his heart told him that all of this was fake. It was fake. That thought had always been there and he couldn't get rid of it no matter what. He knew that it was fake, but everything before his eyes was so real. Fake. Yi Xian turned around to gaze at Yiling, and Yiling chuckled brilliantly. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Fake is real, real is fake. What a Dao of Dreams. As soon as he finished speaking, the space around him trembled like ripples on water, but it didn't take long for it to return to normal. On the other hand, Yiling was still by his side and everything around him was the same as before. Yi Xian instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he noticed this. Earlier he'd thought that everything before his eyes was still an illusion, but Yiling felt so real. Yiling. If this chapter doesn't end, please keep going. Yiling's appearance allowed him to understand that everything before him wasn't an illusion. This was because Yiling was real and there was no illusion in this world that could use Yiling to deceive him. Yiling was real, but everything around him was fake. This made him understand that the illusion before him was only half real. If he used his sword to kill Yiling, not only would he not be able to break the illusion, but he would also regret it for the rest of his life. At this moment, a tiny dream character suddenly condensed between Yi Xian's brows. At the same time, Yi Xian sensed the Dao of Dreams. At this moment he sensed that the Dao of Dreams had established some kind of connection with him, just like the spatial Dao of Dreams and the major Dao of Dreams. The Dao of Dreams. Yi Xian smiled. He could finally use this Dao of Dreams. Yi Xian turned around and gently rubbed Yiling's little head. "I'm going to cultivate." Yiling blinked. Yi Xian smiled. "Do you want to go together?" Yiling was about to nod, but she seemed to have thought of something and shook her head. I'll look for you later. Yi Xian smiled. After saying that, he turned around and transformed into a sword light, disappearing into the horizon. On the city wall, Yi Ling looked at the horizon in the distance. No one knew what she was thinking. Yi Xian came to a dense forest. With a wave of his right hand, the Moke sword floated in front of him. What he needed to do now was to fuse the Tao of Dreams with the sword Tao. Yi Xian discovered that the most terrifying thing about the Tao of Dreams was that it could create illusions. Moreover, it could create illusions silently, causing people to unknowingly fall into illusions. Moreover, it could create multiple illusions. With this ability and the flying sword, many people would not even know how they died. In the following period of time, Yi Xian started to study the Tao of Dreams like crazy. Because he had the Tao of Dreams, it was not difficult for him to study it. In the blink of an eye, 10 days passed. During these 10 days, Yi Xian cultivated almost every day. During these 10 days, many things happened in the never-ending star domain. One of the biggest things was the reconciliation between the never-ending star domain and the Moke clan. The Moke clan officially moved into the never-ending star domain. No one in the never-ending star domain objected to this, nor did they dare to object. This was because the painter and never-ending sky had already agreed. Therefore, the Moke clan was also a member of the never-ending star domain. On this day, the painter and never-ending sky came to the dense forest. Yi Xian, who was cultivating, stood up and walked to the two women. The painter sized up Yi Xian. Cultivating. Yi Xian nodded and said with a smile, "Seniors, did you come to find me for something?" The painter nodded. "We are leaving." Leaving? Yi Xian was stunned. Then he asked, "To where?" The painter smiled. "I don't know yet." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian and said seriously, "You have a treasure on you. Many people will definitely not let you go because the temptation is too great. So you have to be careful." Yi Xian nodded. "I will be careful." The painter suddenly smiled. "You promised me something. You haven't forgotten, right?" Yi Xian smiled. "Of course. Senior, do you want to enter now?" The painter looked at never-ending sky. "Together." Never-ending sky hesitated and then nodded. Just like that, the two women entered the prison pagoda. Inside the pagoda, the two women looked around curiously. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. The treasure. The two of them had always been very curious about this treasure. Now that they had seen it, they were still a little shocked. Pressure. The two stood in front of the pagoda and felt a formless pressure. It was as if they were suffocating. A moment later, the two of them left the prison pagoda. The two of them exchanged glances. In the end, the painter looked at Yi Xian and said in a low voice, "This treasure of yours isn't ordinary." Yi Xian nodded. "I know." The painter said softly, "Take care of yourself." As she spoke, she tapped out with a finger. A strand of white light entered the space between Yi Xian's brows. "This chapter isn't finished. Please continue to the next page." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What is this?" The painter said, "Our divine sense. You can contact us through this. If you need help in the future, you can contact us directly." Yi Xian's heart felt warm. He bowed slightly. "Thank you." The painter smiled. "Until next time." As she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished into the horizon. Never-ending sky looked at Yi Xian. "Your life is the most important." As she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished. "Gone." Yi Xian looked at the horizon and said softly, "All of you have to live well as well." At this time, Xianxia and Lian Wanli suddenly walked over. The two women walked in front of Yi Xian and Lian Wanli said, "I heard from Ling that you're going to that god race?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." "Are the two of you going together?" Lian Wanli shook his head. "I came this time to tell you that we're going to Divine Martial City first. It isn't just us, Linger and your mother are going as well." Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. "Why?" Xianxia said, "The profound gate will escort us there." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "I'm afraid Ling will be going with me." Lian Wanli smiled. "She took the initiative to go with us." Yi Xian was puzzled. Lian Wanli suddenly said, "She's grown up. She said that she wants to learn to be independent and that she can't always rely on you." Yi Xian shook his head. "What a silly little girl." Lian Wanli smiled. "You should be happy that she thinks like that." After all, her natural talent is extraordinary. If she cultivates properly, then she might not be inferior to you in the future. Yi Xian smiled. That's true. Lian Wanli said, we're leaving right now. Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, so soon? Lian Wanli nodded. Divine Martial City is quite far, so the sooner we leave the better. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, then I'll go bid my farewells to Ling. As he spoke, he turned around with the intention of leaving. Lian Wanli suddenly said, there's no need. Yi Xian gazed at Lian Wanli and the latter shook her head. She's afraid that she won't want to leave after seeing you. So she won't meet you now. She said that she'll be waiting for you in Divine Martial City. Yi Xian was speechless. Lian Wanli smiled. See you in Divine Martial City. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left with Xiao. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of them, and Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, safety-wise. Xiao spoke softly, don't worry, the sect master, master painter and senior midnight will personally escort us there. We won't be in danger. Yi Xian heaved a slight sigh of relief when he heard this. Master painter, midnight heaven and that sect master were working together. Unless the Star Lord himself arrived, otherwise Xiao and the others probably wouldn't be in any danger. Because all of them together were much more formidable than Yi Xian. Following these three people was much safer than following him. Lian Wanli gazed at Yi Xian and spoke in a low voice. You on the other hand, you must be careful. Yi Xian nodded. I know. Lian Wanli nodded slightly. See you in Divine Martial City. As soon as she finished speaking, both of them turned around and vanished into the horizon. In the dense forest. Yi Xian spoke softly, Emperor Hound, let's go to the god race. Emperor Hound said, Yao? Yi Xian said angrily, nonsense. My woman and sister have already gone to Divine Martial City. Why should I waste time here? Let's go to the god race and then to Divine Martial City. Woman? Which one of them is your woman? Both of them. Yi Xian didn't even turn around. Emperor Hound. P.S. I've seen a lot of old friends recently. Seventh sister Sprite and that guy who keeps scolding me. As long as you don't scold my family, I won't be angry. I'm a writer and a reader, so I can empathize with the reader's feelings. Most of the time the readers scolded the authors because they liked them. They scolded them because they wanted the authors to write better. On the contrary, if they didn't scold them, it meant that they didn't read them. I like being praised by you saying that Director Luan is awesome, but I also listen to the readers' opinions. I'm grateful for you guys. End of this chapter. Chapter 498. After bidding farewell to the war army and Baldi, Yi Xian left the never-ending starfield and arrived in the vast starry sky. In the starry sky, Yi Xian stood quietly. In his hand was the Imperial Starship. Yi Xian pondered for a long time before he figured out how to activate the Imperial Starship. Yi Xian held the Imperial Starship and muttered a few words. Soon the Imperial Starship in his hand trembled. The next moment, the Imperial Starship suddenly turned into a beam of white light and appeared not far away. At that moment, the Imperial Starship was nearly 1,000 feet long, and it was surrounded by a stream of light. Imposing. That was Yi Xian's first impression. Yi Xian stood on the Imperial Starship. He had to admit that the Imperial Starship was very imposing. It was completely different from those cloud ships. The two were not on the same level at all. Not only that, but there were all kinds of arrays on the Imperial Starship, some for defense, some for attack. As long as he had enough purple origin crystals, he could activate these arrays. At that moment, the archdog appeared beside Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the archdog and it said softly, "Let's go." Yi Xian said, "You do it." The archdog nodded slightly. Soon the Imperial Starship started and flew into the depths of the starry sky. At first it was very slow. Yi Xian turned his head and looked down. From his position he could still vaguely see the Great Wall of Burial Sky. However, the Great Wall of Burial Sky was getting smaller and smaller because the Imperial Starship was getting faster and faster. Soon Yi Xian could no longer see the Great Wall of Burial Sky. At that moment the Imperial Starship's speed had reached its peak. It was so fast that even Yi Xian was astonished. Because the Imperial Starship's speed had exceeded the speed of his flying sword. What terrifying speed! Soon Yi Xian and the archdog disappeared into the depths of the vast starry sky. Not long after Yi Xian and the archdog left, a group of people suddenly arrived at the Great Wall of Burial Sky. Under the Great Wall, the leader was a woman. She wore silver armor and had a ponytail, looking very valiant. Beside the woman there was another woman and 2 men. These 4 people were Jiang Jiu, Mo Yunqi, Bai Zai and Ji Anji. Mo Yunqi suddenly said, "Ninth princess, do you think the gap between us and Bandit Yi is big?" In front, Jiang Jiu said calmly, "Whether he's big or not, won't you know after you fight him?" Mo Yunqi chuckled, "That's for sure." As he spoke, he looked at Bai Zai beside him. "Big guy, you go first." Bai Zai glanced at Mo Yunqi. "I don't know if I can defeat Bandit Yi, but I can definitely defeat you." Hearing this, Mo Yunqi laughed coldly with a look of disdain. Bai Zai said calmly, "Do you want to try now?" Just as Mo Yunqi was about to speak, Jiang Jiu suddenly stopped. In front of them stood a man. This person was the war army. War army looked at Jiang Jiu and the others. "You are." Jiang Jiu said, "Is Yi Xian around?" "Yi Xian?" War army was stunned and then said, "You are." Jiang Jiu said, "His friend." "Friend." The wariness in War Army's eyes disappeared. He smiled and said, "You're late. Yi Xian has already left." "Left?" Mo Yunqi jumped in front of War Army. "Where did he go?" War Army said, "I don't know the specifics, but he will go to Shenwu City in the future." "Shenwu City?" Mo Yunqi and the others looked at each other. Finally, Jiang Jiu said in a deep voice, "Is it far?" War Army nodded. "Very far." As he spoke, he looked at Mo Yunqi and the others. "Why are you looking for him?" Mo Yunqi said, "To beat him up." War Army looked at Mo Yunqi with a strange expression. Mo Yunqi said with some dissatisfaction, "What's with your expression? Why are you looking down on me?" War Army smiled and said, "I don't mean that, but Brother Yi is very strong now." Mo Yunqi patted his chest. "Do you know who I am?" War Army looked at Mo Yunqi and Mo Yunqi said seriously, "Back then I was the one who pressed him to the ground and rubbed him." War Army. Mo Yunqi still wanted to say something, but Bai Zai on the side suddenly said, "If you don't shut up, I will hit you." Mo Yunqi. At this time Jiang Jiu suddenly said, "To Shenwu City." Ji Anji nodded. "To Shenwu City." Jiang Jiu looked at War Army. "How do I get to Shenwu City?" War Army hesitated and then said, "It's very dangerous for you to travel in the starry sky. How about this? I will take you to see Mr. Bai and let Mr. Bai send someone to escort you." Jiang Jiu said, "Thank you very much." War Army smiled and said, "You are his friends, so you are my friends. Don't be polite. Come with me." Soon War Army brought Jiang Jiu and the others to see Mr. Bai. 2 hours later, a star cloud warship set off from Burial Sky Great Wall. On the Star Cloud warship there was Jiang Jiu and the others, and there was an additional War Army. Their target was the Divine Martial City. On the Star Cloud warship, Mo Yunqi suddenly shouted, "Shenwu City, I am coming, tremble." At this time Bai Zai kicked Mo Yunqi. In the starry sky, the Imperial starship shuttled through, ignoring all black holes and spatial rocks. Yi Xian stood at the bow of the ship. He looked at the starry sky in the distance and said softly, "Brother Emperor Dog, are the Protoss all very arrogant?" Emperor Dog said, "Not just an ordinary kind of arrogance. You have to be mentally prepared." Yi Xian said, "Brother Emperor, do the Protoss have any treasures? Those especially powerful treasures, and I am just asking." Emperor Dog said calmly, "This is your real goal." Yi Xian said seriously, "You think too badly of me. I Yi Xian am not that kind." "Stop, stop." Emperor Dog suddenly said, "Don't talk to me about this. You know what kind of person you are." Yi Xian. Emperor Dog suddenly said, "My Protoss has a treasure." Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "What is it?" Emperor Dog said solemnly, "The Divine King's throne." Yi Xian asked, "What is that?" Emperor Dog said, "It is a chair." Yi Xian asked, "What is it used for?" Emperor Dog said, "I don't know." Yi Xian's mouth twitched. "You don't know? How can you not know?" Emperor Dog said angrily, "I have never sat on it, how would I know?" Yi Xian. Emperor Dog said, "This Divine King's throne is my Protoss treasure. Only the Protoss Patriarch can sit on it. As for how powerful it is, I don't know." Yi Xian smiled. Is it stronger than my tower? Emperor Dog said calmly, what are you showing off for? Do you think you can set up this tower? If you die in the future, it will definitely be this tower that kills you. When it spoke up to hear, it paused for a moment and said, Kid, where did you get this damn pagoda? Zhou Xian said, someone gave it to me. Emperor Dog. After chatting with Emperor Dog for a while, Zhou Xian handed the Imperial Starship to Emperor Dog. Then he returned to his room. Cultivation. During this period he had been crazily cultivating the Dream Dao Law every day. To be precise, he was studying the 3 Dao Laws every day, hoping to fully develop the power of the 3 Dao Laws. Especially the Dream Dao Law. He liked the Dream Dao Law more and more. This was because the combination of the Dream Dao Law and his flying sword was truly too perfect. Dream Sword. In the following period, Zhou Xian cultivated crazily every day. 5 days later, the Imperial Starship suddenly trembled. In the room, Zhou Xian hurriedly got up and went to the cloud board. He looked up and saw that they were shuttling through a black hole. All around, powerful forces kept hitting the Imperial Starship. These forces were so strong that even he was a little afraid. If it had been a nebula warship, it would have been smashed to pieces. Zhou Xian looked at Emperor Dog. What is this? Emperor Dog said, a black hole. Zhou Xian said, we have shuttled through many black holes before, but nothing like this. Emperor Dog said, there are strong and weak black holes. Don't worry, this Imperial Starship can withstand it. Zhou Xian nodded slightly. How much longer until we arrive? Earth hesitated and said, I don't know. Zhou Xian looked at Emperor Dog in shock. You're not joking? Emperor Dog smiled awkwardly. I haven't been back in a long time. I can't remember the route clearly. Zhou Xian's face darkened. You're not joking with me? Emperor Dog chuckled. In any case, it's this direction. Can't be wrong. Zhou Xian was speechless. Just like that, about 2 hours later, the Imperial Starship passed through the black hole and arrived in a star sector. The Emperor Dog quickly looked around. As it looked around, it frowned. Zhou Xian asked, what is it? Emperor Dog said, it seems familiar. Zhou Xian asked, is it here? Emperor Dog said in a deep voice, let's take a stroll first. Zhou Xian nodded and steered the Imperial Starship forward. Zhou Xian found that the surrounding starry sky was very quiet. Moreover, there was no aura of life. Not only that, but the spiritual energy in this star sector was very thin. At this time, Emperor Dog beside Zhou Xian suddenly said, after something happened to the god race, the underworld race took the opportunity to invade. I was also trapped in that endless purgatory. After so many years, the god realm should have undergone earth-shattering changes. I hope there are still people from the god race. Zhou Xian said, something happened to the god race? Is it because of Jian's eye? Emperor Dog nodded. Its face was a bit bitter. If the patriarch hadn't gone too far, our god race wouldn't have declined. And she wouldn't have hated the god race so much. Not only did she kill all the god race powerhouses, but she also destroyed the god race's ancestral shrine. Sigh. Zhou Xian nodded slightly. What's the point of valuing men over women? I think women are also very powerful. Among the women he knew, it seemed that women were more powerful. He just didn't know if the 6th floor was a male or female. If it was a female, then the matter might not be so serious. Emperor Dog said again, those old fellows of the god race are too stubborn. Zhou Xian nodded. Just as he was about to say something, Zhou Xian and Emperor Dog looked up at the same time. In the starry sky there stood a giant sword. The giant sword was thousands of feet long, standing in the starry sky. The giant sword didn't have a sword tip, as if it had been cut off by someone. On the front of the giant sword there were 2 big black words. Sword Sect. Chapter 499. Sword Sect. Zhou Xian was struck dumb as soon as he saw the 2 big characters. Sword Sect? He had once seen these 2 words in a new world. There was a sect there, and it was also called the Sword Sect. What was the connection between these 2 sword sects? After a while, Zhou Xian turned to look at the Emperor Hound. Is this the divine realm? The Emperor Dog glanced at its surroundings and said, perhaps. Zhou Xian was speechless. The Emperor Hound chuckled. Since we're here, let's go and take a look. Zhou Xian was speechless. This fellow had definitely led him to the wrong place. This was not the divine realm. Zhou Xian looked into the distance. The huge sword stood towering in the starry sky. It was very majestic and it gave off a feeling that it could pierce through the sky. Moreover, it carried an extremely powerful sword aura. Yi Xian silently sensed the aura. This sword aura was like a surging wave that seemed capable of destroying everything. Not simple. After a while, Yi Xian said, "Let's go and take a look." After saying that, he led the Emperor Hound to the huge sword. Standing under the huge sword, the sword aura became even more powerful, and the pressure made it difficult to breathe. The Emperor Hound glanced at the huge sword and said in a low voice, "This place is not simple." Yi Xian nodded. "It is not simple. Let's go and take a look." After saying that, he led the Emperor Hound around the huge sword. In the distant starry sky behind the huge sword stood a huge and damaged palace. There were 72 flying swords circling above the palace. Apart from that, the sound of swords could be heard from time to time around the palace. Yi Xian frowned slightly. There's someone here? However, he didn't sense any signs of life. Yi Xian sped up and soon he and the monarch hound arrived in front of the main hall. As soon as they arrived, several flying swords shot towards him and the monarch hound like bolts of lightning. Yi Xian remained expressionless and did not dodge. The two flying swords shattered the moment they reached him. At the same time, a black and a white sword appeared in front of him. Right at this moment, a sword howl suddenly resounded from within the hall, and then a ray of light suddenly shot into the sky from within the hall. Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound looked up. Tens of thousands of swords had gathered in the air and they were circling in the air. At that moment, the tens of thousands of swords suddenly turned around and pointed their tips at Yi Xian and the Emperor Dog. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's face darkened. Was this sword formation being controlled by someone? Yi Xian didn't have the time to think about it when the swords suddenly shot down at an extremely swift speed, and they instantly arrived above Yi Xian and the monarch hound. The monarch hound was just about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Allow me." As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his fingers together and spun them slightly. Two sword howls resounded abruptly, and then a black and white ray of light suddenly appeared here. As soon as they appeared, the sound of slicing resounded, and it only took a short moment for the tens of thousands of swords to be transformed into a pile of pieces. The monarch hound couldn't help but glance at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's flying swords were much faster than before. Yi Xian raised his head and looked towards the distance. In the next moment he'd appeared before the hall, but the hall was completely empty. There wasn't a single person within it. Yi Xian frowned. But right at this moment, a ray of light suddenly appeared within the hall, and it slashed down towards him. Yi Xian pressed his fingers together and pointed forward. Bang! With this one point, the sword light immediately shattered. Yi Xian raised his head and looked over. There was a wooden figure that held a sword in its hand standing on a stone platform within the hall. Yi Xian was quite puzzled. Was that fellow the one who created that ray of light? At this moment, the wooden man suddenly leaped up and landed right in front of Yi Xian. At the same time, the long sword in its hand pierced towards Yi Xian's forehead as fast as lightning. At the instant that the wooden figure attacked, Yi Xian suddenly attacked as well. It was even swifter than before and it stabbed against the wooden figure's chest. However, just Yi Xian's expression changed when he pierced the wooden puppet's chest. This was because his sword did not pierce through the wooden puppet in front of him. On the contrary, the wooden puppet's sword was already several inches away from his forehead. Yi Xian tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot and moved backwards. Suddenly, the speed of the wooden figure's sword increased explosively. When Yi Xian retreated more than 10 feet, a drop of blood slowly fell from where he had been standing. Yi Xian gently touched the spot between his eyebrows. There was a small sword scar there. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the wooden figure in the distance. At that moment, there was a trace of seriousness on his face. The speed of the wooden figure's sword had started off at a deceptive speed. The sudden acceleration at the end was the wooden figure's true speed. He had been tricked. To be more accurate, he had underestimated his opponent. In the distance, the wooden figure lightly pointed its sword at Yi Xian. Its provocation was self-evident. Not far away, the Emperor Hound suddenly laughed. Seeing Yi Xian suffer a setback, it felt inexplicably happy. Yi Xian wielded his sword and walked towards the wooden figure. At that moment, the wooden figure didn't attack. He just stood there quietly. When Yi Xian was half a foot away from the wooden figure suddenly attacked. A cold light flashed. Almost at the same time Yi Xian also attacked. It was a tit for tat. However, in the blink of an eye, Yi Xian retreated more than 10 feet. There was a deep sword mark on his right arm. In the distance, the wooden figure was still standing in its original spot, not moving an inch. Not far away, Yi Xian had an ugly expression on his face. In that instant he had attacked with the wooden figure at the same time. His sword speed wasn't any slower than the wooden figure's. However, he had lost. This was because the wooden figure hadn't attacked with one sword but two. There was another sword in the wooden figure's left hand. This wooden figure was using two swords. Not far away, the Emperor Hound also stopped smiling. There was a trace of solemnity in its eyes. If Yi Xian had been careless and underestimated his opponent at the beginning, then this time Yi Xian had been defeated. The Emperor Hound was very clear about Yi Xian's attainments in swordsmanship. For this wooden figure to be able to defeat Yi Xian twice in a row, it could be said that it was a little terrifying. Not far away, Yi Xian fell silent. Reflect. Why did I lose just now? Was it simply because the wooden figure had used two swords? Actually, that wasn't entirely the case. There was another reason, and that was that his sword's speed wasn't fast enough. Moreover, his reaction time wasn't fast enough because he hadn't even been able to react when the wooden figure had attacked a second time. This was a suppression of speed and awareness. Yi Xian looked at the wooden figure in the distance and he was slightly puzzled. Is this really a wooden figure? At this moment, the wooden figure suddenly pointed its sword at Yi Xian, indicating for Yi Xian to continue. Yi Xian walked towards the wooden figure with his sword in hand. At the side, the Emperor Hound suddenly said, "Watch out." It could tell that this wooden figure's every move was lethal and had no intention of holding back. Yi Xian nodded and then he walked over to the wooden figure. This time the wooden figure didn't attack and neither did Yi Xian. The man and the wooden figure just stood there for an entire hour. During this hour, neither Yi Xian nor the wooden figure had attacked. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly attacked, and at the instant that Yi Xian attacked, the wooden figure attacked as well. The swords were extremely fast and they were dual swords. At the instant that the wooden figure attacked, the two flying swords silently slashed towards the wooden figure's head. However, Yi Xian hadn't expected that as soon as his flying swords appeared, they would be knocked away by the wooden figure. At the same time, one of the wooden figure's swords directly arrived between his eyebrows. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly and he hurriedly dodged backwards. As soon as he did so, the wooden figure suddenly stabbed its sword at him from afar. As soon as the sword stabbed out, four shadows holding swords suddenly appeared around Yi Xian. Before Yi Xian could react, the four swords had already arrived at all the vital points of his body. At this moment, two flying swords suddenly appeared around him and soon rays of sword light appeared around him. Almost in an instant, his whole body was surrounded by these rays of sword light. Amidst the sword light, Yi Xian's expression was solemn. The four shadows around him had swords that were too fast, so fast that his flying swords could barely block them. On the side, the Emperor Dog's expression was also somewhat solemn. It had seen how fast Yi Xian's flying swords were, but the speed of the four shadows in front of it was unexpectedly faster than Yi Xian's flying swords. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly slashed forward with his sword. This sword slashed directly towards the shadow in front of him. However, as soon as his sword slashed down, the shadow's sword suddenly stabbed below the tip of his sword. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly, because he found that the power of his sword seemed to have disappeared at this moment. At this moment, the shadow closed in. Boom. In an instant, Yi Xian retreated nearly 100 zhang. In front of Yi Xian, the sword light disappeared, and the four shadows suddenly returned to the wooden man's body. The wooden man did not continue to attack. It returned to its original position, its long sword pointed diagonally to the ground, and it did not emit any aura. Yi Xian glanced at his body. At this moment, there were no less than 30 sword scars on his body. These 30 sword scars were all left by the shadow from before. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the wooden man not far away. At this moment he suddenly felt a little confused. Was a wooden man so powerful? From the beginning to the end, this wooden man did not use any sword skills, only pure swordsmanship. He was defeated by the opponent's swordsmanship. Moreover, it was after using the flying swords. In front of this wooden man, whether it was the speed of his sword, strength or technique, he was completely suppressed by the opponent. At this moment the emperor dog walked to Yi Xian's side. "Do you still want to fight?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Of course." With that he walked toward the wooden man. Soon Yi Xian and the wooden man started fighting again, but after a while he was completely defeated. Fortunately the wooden man did not chase after him. As long as he left the hall the wooden man would stop. Therefore, although he was defeated, as long as he left the hall, his life would not be in danger. Just like that Yi Xian went to the wooden man again and again, but he was defeated every time. The only difference was that he lost for a longer period of time. 3 days later Yi Xian could withstand the wooden man's sword for an hour. 5 days later Yi Xian could withstand it for an hour. 10 days later Yi Xian already had the strength to fight. 15 days later Yi Xian came before the wooden man again. This time he was confident that he could defeat it. He walked in front of the wooden man, but this time, unlike before, the wooden man did not wait for him to attack, but suddenly attacked first. Yi Xian's expression changed greatly. Just as he was about to attack, the wooden man seemed to know that he was going to attack and directly stabbed his wrist. This stab forced Yi Xian to retreat, because if he attacked with his sword, it would be equivalent to using his wrist to block the wooden man's sword. Retreat. Yi Xian's reaction was also very fast. After he took a step back, he unsheathed his sword and slashed. Unsheathing the sword to determine life and death. However, this sword was only halfway through, and the wooden man's sword was already half an inch away from his eyebrows. Yi Xian had no choice but to stop and retreat again. Half a breath later Yi Xian had retreated to the door, and this time the wooden man suddenly stopped and retreated. Defeated. Yi Xian's mind was filled with terror. After the wooden man attacked first, he was actually defeated in an instant. At this time the wooden man not far away suddenly spoke. The ancestor said, "The sword strike first, pay attention to the unchanging, find the flaw, one sword to break all methods, one move to kill." Yi Xian looked at the wooden man and asked, "What sword strike first?" The wooden man said, "The sword strike first, pay attention to the preemptive strike, seize the initiative and win by surprise." Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "Who is your ancestor?" The wooden man said, "You have the ancestor's aura on you, Yi Xian. P.S. Do you still have your tickets? Chapter 500. Ancestral Master's Aura? Yi Xian frowned. "What do you mean?" The wooden man, "Ancestral Master's Aura." Yi Xian asked again, "What Ancestral Master's Aura?" The wooden man, "Ancestral Master's Aura." Yi Xian was speechless. He finally understood. This wooden man was most likely just a wooden man, not a living being. At this time the Emperor Hound suddenly said, "This wooden man should be in existence similar to a strength imparter." Strength imparter? Yi Xian looked at the Emperor Hound, and the Emperor Hound nodded. "My God clan once had such existences. They are not living beings, but they have extremely strong battle awareness and combat ability. Their role is to pass down and teach, and this wooden man before you should be the same. However, this fellow is much stronger than the strength imparters of my God clan. The person who set it up should be an extremely powerful swordsman." Yi Xian nodded. He was very impressed with this wooden man because its swordsmanship was truly strong. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian looked at the wooden man. "Why Ancestral Master's Aura?" The wooden man, "Ancestral Master's Aura." Yi Xian walked in front of the wooden man. This time the wooden man did not draw its sword, but Yi Xian still did not dare to be careless, because if the wooden man suddenly drew its sword, Yi Xian was not 100% sure he could block it. But this time the wooden man did not make a move. Yi Xian walked in front of the wooden man and lightly touched it with his right hand. It was just a simple piece of wood, not some special material. Yi Xian said with a smile, "Follow me." The wooden man, "Ancestral Master's Aura." Yi Xian chuckled and directly recalled the wooden man into the World Prison Pagoda. As soon as it entered the World Prison Pagoda, the wooden man was about to resist, but at this time, it suddenly looked up and slowly walked to the top of the pagoda. At the top of the pagoda, the wooden man walked in front of one of the swords and stood there, not moving an inch. Outside the World Prison Pagoda, Yi Xian frowned. Was this wooden man related to the master of the sword at the top of the pagoda? After a while Yi Xian stopped thinking about this problem. In any case, from his point of view, this wooden statue was now his. When he had nothing to do, he could use the wooden puppet as a sparring partner. If he encountered a powerful enemy, This wooden puppet would be a super helper. Xian collected his thoughts and raised his head to look at the great hall in the distance. The great hall was somewhat dilapidated and was covered in a thick layer of dust. The Emperor Hound whispered, "This place must have experienced some kind of disaster." Xian nodded and then he said, "Let's go take a look and see if there are any treasures." Emperor Dog. Xian walked around but did not find any valuable treasures. Other than that, he didn't find anyone else. Not even a soul body. In the end, Xian decided to leave. However, right when he was about to leave, a sword howl suddenly resounded from a mountain range behind the hall. Xian was stunned and then he hurriedly said, "Let's go, there are treasures." After saying that, he directly disappeared not far away. The Emperor Hound's face was somewhat ugly. Was he really going to bring this guy to the celestial race? Now it was somewhat hesitant. This guy went to the celestial race. It did not dare to imagine. The Emperor Hound sighed softly and then it followed. After Xian arrived at the back of the mountain, he followed the source of the sword howl to a bamboo forest. In the bamboo forest there was a bamboo house and beside the bamboo house was a pool. Xian walked to the bamboo house and the bamboo house was empty, not a single person was inside. Xian frowned slightly. Where did that sword howl come from? After a while, Xian walked into the bamboo house and on the wall of the house hung a sheathed sword. Other than that, there was nothing else. Xian walked to the sheathed sword. At this moment, the sword slightly trembled and a sword howl sounded from the sword. Xian held the sword with his left hand and his right hand held the hilt. He gently pulled. However, when he pulled, the sword did not move at all. Xian was stunned and then he forcefully pulled but the sword still did not move. Xian frowned and he circulated the celestial qi in his body, and then suddenly pulled. The sword did not move at all. Xian looked at the Emperor Hound and the Emperor Hound said, "Let me try." Xian nodded and handed the sword to the Emperor Hound. The Emperor Hound held the sheath with one paw and the hilt with the other and pulled. However, the sword still did not move at all. At this moment, Xian and the Emperor Hound had somewhat serious expressions. The Emperor Hound said in a low voice, "This sword is not simple." As it spoke, it handed the sword to Xian. After Xian took the sword, he carefully looked at it. The sheath was very ordinary, like ordinary iron, and the hilt was also very ordinary. There was nothing eye-catching about it. What sword is this? Xian played with the sword in his hand and he was somewhat puzzled. Although the sword looked very ordinary, he knew that if he and the Emperor Hound could not pull it out, it was definitely not an ordinary sword. At this moment, the sword suddenly trembled. Xian held the hilt, and the hilt shook violently as if it wanted to come out. Xian pulled again but the sword still did not move. Xian said in a low voice, "This sword is a bit strange." The Emperor Hound nodded. "We will study it later, we have to go." Xian nodded, put away the sword, looked around and then turned to leave. Soon the Emperor Hound and Xian left the sword sect. In the starry sky, Xian suddenly stopped, looked back at the sword sect in front of him and said in a low voice, "This should have been a very powerful sect." The Emperor Hound said, "My celestial race was even grander than this place but still." As it spoke, it looked at Xian. "All these years I have learned a truth: no matter how powerful a faction is, it will be destroyed one day. No faction can exist forever." Xian nodded slightly. "Let's go." With that, he turned and left with the Emperor Hound. After Xian and the Emperor Hound left, a black-robed man and an old man suddenly appeared on the giant sword. The black-robed man looked coldly in the direction in which Xian and the Emperor Hound had left. "He is Xian?" The old man nodded. "Yes." The black-robed man said in a low voice, "Why did you stop me just now?" The old man said, "The planet lord only wanted us to follow him." The black-robed man said coldly, "This person is so weak, why not just kill him now?" The old man looked at the black-robed man. "So weak?" In the Battle of Never-Ending Starfield, the planet lord's clone died, and the entire Alliance army was annihilated, all because of this person. You think he is weak? The black-robed man narrowed his eyes and did not speak. The old man said softly, "The planet lord only needs us to follow him. Now that the planet lord is healing, we should not act rashly and ruin the planet lord's plan." The black-robed man was silent for a moment, then he turned to look at the sword sect behind him. "Do you know what faction this sword sect used to be?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know." The black-robed man said, "There is also a sword sect in Shenwu City. I don't know if this sword sect is related to that sword sect." The old man looked at the sword sect in the distance and shook his head. "I don't know, this place is too remote." The black-robed man said coldly, "Xian must have had some fortuitous encounter in this sword sect. If we let him go, he will become a big problem in the future." The old man said in a deep voice, "Planet Lord means..." The black-robed man sneered, "I know what the Planet Lord means, but if we kill him now, get that treasure and then give it to the Planet Lord, do you think the Planet Lord will blame us? Moreover, this person's goal is Shenwu City. Once he enters Shenwu City, you and I will not have a chance to attack. So I want to take a risk. If we can kill him, it's best, but if we can kill him, it's fine. No, with our strength, we should be able to escape unscathed." At this moment, from the sword sect in the distance, a sword light suddenly flew out. The black-robed man's voice stopped abruptly. The next moment, his head suddenly tilted and fell from his neck. The old man beside the black-robed man was stunned. The next moment, he turned around and ran, disappearing at the end of the starry sky in the blink of an eye. On top of the giant sword, a bloody head slowly fell to the ground. On the Imperial starship, Xian asked, "Brother D, do you know the way or not?" After leaving the sword sect, they had been shuttling through the starry sky for several hours, and they had been shuttling back and forth. Not far from Xian, the Emperor Hound looked around a little puzzled. "It should be this area, why isn't it here?" Xian looked around, the starry sky was silent, only the stars twinkling. As if thinking of something, Xian suddenly said, "Could it be that there is a formation to hide the location of the god domain?" The Emperor Hound was stunned, then suddenly realized, "Why didn't I think of that?" Xian nodded slightly, "Let me see." Saying that, he slowly closed his eyes and soon his sword intent spread out. A moment later, Xian suddenly bent his finger, a sword light piercing through the sky. Thousands of feet away, the space there suddenly rippled like water. Soon, under the gaze of Xian and the Emperor Hound, an illusory black flag suddenly appeared in that space. Seeing this, the Emperor Hound hurriedly said, "Illusory formation, this is my god race's illusory formation. Someone from my god race must be alive." Before it finished speaking, an old man suddenly appeared in front of them. The old man was a little tall. He looked coldly at Xian and the Emperor Hound. "Lowly human? Lowly human." Both Xian and the Emperor Hound were stunned. Xian looked at the Emperor Hound. "Brother D, I'll give you face, come at me." The Emperor Hound suddenly said angrily, "Lowly your mother." At this moment, the old man suddenly looked at the Emperor Hound, his eyes slightly narrowed. "Where did this beast come from? How dare you talk nonsense here? Are you tired of living?" The Emperor Hound suddenly leaped up and slapped the old man. The old man smiled coldly, punching out. Rumble. The Emperor Hound was forced back to its original place, but the old man also retreated a full 1,000 feet. The old man looked at the Emperor Hound, frowning slightly. "I didn't expect a beast like you to have some ability." Next to the Emperor Hound, Xian was a little confused. "He doesn't know you?" The Emperor Hound said, "I didn't transform." Xian was taken aback, then said, "You transformed." The Emperor Hound's face was a little ugly. "I still can't transform." Xian. Not far away, the old man suddenly said, "Lowly human, this old man will give you a chance. Take this beast and get out of my god race's territory or else." At this moment, the word dream quietly appeared between Xian's eyebrows. A moment later, Xian appeared in front of the old man, his sword pressed against the old man's eyebrows. The old man's face was full of disbelief. The next moment he said angrily, "Lowly human you." At this moment, Xian's sword suddenly stabbed into the old man's mouth, then lightly twisted. The old man's tongue was directly crushed. The old man's eyes were wide open, full of savagery, but he did not dare to move, because Xian's sword had already stabbed into his throat. If it went any further, he would definitely die. Xian looked at the Emperor Hound. "Is the god race's sense of superiority innate?" The Emperor Hound hesitated, then said, "Actually, he is already considered low-key." Xian. Chapter 501. Xian was speechless when he heard the Emperor Hound's words. Was this old man already keeping a low profile? At this moment he truly felt how arrogant the Protoss were. Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the Emperor Hound. Brother D, how should we deal with this person? The Emperor Hound said calmly, don't give me any face. Xian nodded slightly and raised his sword. The old man's head flew off instantly. In the air the old man's head slowly fell. His eyes were wide open. He had never thought that he would die just like that. Xian looked forward and said softly, Brother Emperor Hound, I'm afraid it won't be easy to negotiate with the Protoss this time. The Emperor Hound's face was gloomy and it did not speak. The Protoss. Actually, as a member of the Protoss, it also had its own pride. However, after being locked up for so many years, it had figured out many things. The Protoss were actually not the strongest in this vast universe, especially after seeing Xian's world prison pagoda, Disheng, and that swordsman. The Protoss had already declined. Forget about declining, even at their peak there was nothing to be proud of. Forget about the mysterious swordsman, even that Disheng was not someone the Protoss could contend against. Now the Protoss could be said to be like stray dogs. If they were still arrogant at this time they would be courting death. Without strength they had to be more temperamental. However, after seeing the Protoss just now, it knew that the Protoss' habit of looking down on everyone and everything else had not changed. As if he knew what the Emperor Hound was thinking, Xian comforted it. Brother D, I believe that not everyone in the Protoss is like that old man. The Emperor Hound sighed softly. The Protoss call themselves gods. Therefore they are very disdainful of other races, especially humans. This is because during the Protoss era humans were the Protoss servants. At this point it looked at Xian. They despise and disdain humans from the bottom of their hearts, just like how humans treat livestock. Xian shook his head. If the survivors of your god race still have this mentality, forgive me for being blunt, then there's really no hope. The Emperor Hound nodded. If they're really like this, then it's best that she doesn't come. Otherwise the god clan will be completely slaughtered. Xian was just about to speak when the space in front of them suddenly trembled. Soon, a middle-aged man appeared in front of Xian and the Emperor Dog. The middle-aged man looked at Xian and frowned. Human. Xian nodded. Human. The middle-aged man's eyes turned cold. You killed a member of my god race. Xian said, kill him. The middle-aged man stared at Xian. How did you know that my god race is here? Xian looked at the Archhound and said, Brother the Archhound, I think it's better if you pretend to be someone else. Otherwise we might have to fight to the death with the god race. The Archhound walked in front of the middle-aged man and looked at him coldly. Why? Does no one in the god race recognize me now? The middle-aged man stared at the Archhound. After a while he frowned. Where did you come from, beast? You. The Archhound suddenly flew into a rage. Beast my ass. As soon as it finished speaking it leaped. The middle-aged man's expression changed and he slammed his right hand down. Boom. With a loud explosion, the Archhound was sent flying hundreds of meters away. However, the middle-aged man was also sent flying hundreds of meters back. The middle-aged man was shocked. He looked at the Archhound with a serious expression. I didn't expect a beast like you to have some ability. At this moment Xian suddenly felt like laughing, but he held it in. As for the Archhound, it was about to explode with rage. It couldn't transform now, so it couldn't display its full strength. Otherwise, apart from a few people in the god race, no one would be a match for it. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man spoke abruptly, no matter who you are, since you dared to kill a member of my god race, then prepare to suffer the wrath of my god race. As soon as he finished speaking he was about to attack. However, a voice suddenly resounded. Stop. As soon as the voice resounded, the dream character on Xian's forehead silently vanished. A woman had suddenly appeared behind the middle-aged man. She wore a loose robe, had long hair that draped over her shoulders and had a delicate face. She was very beautiful. The middle-aged man hurriedly bowed when he saw the woman, goddess. The woman nodded slightly and then she walked over to Xian and the Archhound. She glanced at Xian, but there was no disdain in her eyes. She was very calm. In next to no time she looked at the Archhound. When she saw it she suddenly frowned. A short while later, a trace of disbelief appeared in her eyes. You're the Archhound? The Archhound glanced coldly at the woman and didn't speak. The woman's expression gradually softened. You've left the god race for many years. It's normal that they don't recognize you. The Archhound looked at the woman. You're the current leader of the god race? The woman nodded. Yes. As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian. Who is he? Yi Xian smiled. I'm Brother the Archhound's friend. Friend. The woman frowned. Friend. Yi Xian nodded. Friend. At this time, the middle-aged man not far away suddenly said coldly, how can a member of the god race be friends with a human? Why not? The Archhound suddenly said, he's my friend. Bite us. The middle-aged man's face was livid with anger. He glared at the Archhound. You are the guardian beast of the god race. How can you lower yourself to be friends with a lowly human? You're disgracing the god race. Yi Xian was dumbfounded by what he heard. He wasn't angry. On the contrary, he wanted to laugh. The Archhound's expression was extremely ugly. This time, it had brought Yi Xian back in the hope that through his relationship with Yi Xian, the relationship between the god race and Zhenzai could be eased. Moreover, it also hoped that Yi Xian could be on good terms with the god race. This was because after getting along with Yi Xian's strength and potential were very terrifying. If the god race could be on good terms with Yi Xian, it would undoubtedly be a very good thing for the god race. However, it didn't expect that so many unpleasantries would happen as soon as it came here. The Archhound suddenly felt a little disheartened. It looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. As it spoke, it turned and left. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Originally, he also wanted to be friends with the god race. If possible, he wanted to ease the relationship between Zhenzai and the god race. Now, however, he felt that he was thinking too much. He didn't want to come into contact with the god race at all. Yi Xian and the Archhound turned and left. At this moment, the woman suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and the Archhound. She looked at the Archhound and asked, You're leaving? The Archhound said indifferently, If I'm not leaving, then what are you staying here for? The woman said in a low voice, You're the divine protector of my god race. The Archhound sneered. Didn't you hear them call me a beast? Besides, don't talk to me about righteousness. I fought for the god race until the end. If it weren't for that group of people from back then, would all of you still be alive now? The woman fell silent for a moment and then she looked at Yi Xian. I hope you can forgive me if I offended you earlier. Yi Xian smiled and said, I can't see your sincerity. The woman's expression was calm. The middle-aged man behind her sneered. If you want to gain the respect of others, then you have to have the strength to do so. If you don't have the strength, then you're delusional enough to gain the respect of others. That's idiocy. A dream character silently appeared between Yi Xian's brows. The woman's expression instantly changed drastically, and a moment later, the surroundings suddenly fell silent. The woman turned around to look at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was slightly dazed, and he was just about to speak when his right arm suddenly fell off and blood sprayed out like a fountain. The middle-aged man was horrified when he witnessed this scene, and he gazed at Yi Xian with disbelief. You. Yi Xian smiled and said, Now shut up. If you speak another word, then I'll make it so that you'll never be able to speak again for the rest of your life. The middle-aged man was just about to say something when the woman suddenly shouted furiously, Stand down. The middle-aged man's expression was slightly unsightly, but he didn't dare disobey the woman and immediately retreated. The woman gazed at Yi Xian. She just stared at Yi Xian and said, I hope you can forgive me if I offended you earlier. Yi Xian smiled and then he gazed at the Archhound. He didn't like the god race and it should be said that he hated it. However, he respected the Archhound. If the Archhound wanted to stay behind, then he would stay behind as well. He didn't want to help the god race, but he would help the Archhound. The Archhound fell silent for a moment before it said, Take us there. I want to see how the god race is doing now. The woman nodded slightly. Come with me. As she spoke, she waved her hand, and a teleportation formation appeared beneath Yi Xian and the Archhound. In the next moment, Yi Xian and the Archhound vanished on the spot. In next to no time, Yi Xian and the Archhound had appeared beneath a set of stone steps. Yi Xian raised his head and saw that the stone steps continued upwards for over 10 kilometers, and there was an enormous palace at the end of them. Grand. This was Yi Xian's first impression upon seeing it. This palace was much more grand than the palace he'd seen in the sword sect. As if she knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the woman suddenly said, It's worlds apart from all those years ago. All those years ago my god race was the most grand in the universe. but now most of its buildings have vanished. As she spoke, she raised her head and gazed at the palace at the end of the stone steps. That's the last divine hall. A divine hall. The archhound spoke in a low voice. How many members of the god race do we have now? The woman replied, over 13,000. The archhound's face fell when it heard this. All those years ago the god race had over 100 million members. Suddenly, 4 experts in golden armor and spears in their hands appeared around Zhou Xian and the archhound. Moreover, an enormous golden net suddenly appeared around Zhou Xian and the archhound, and it directly enveloped Zhou Xian and the archhound. Zhou Xian's face remained emotionless when he witnessed this scene, but the archhound's face had turned gloomy. An old man slowly walked down the stone steps. Next to him was the middle-aged man whose right arm had been cut off by Zhou Xian. The old man and the middle-aged man walked in front of Zhou Xian, and the middle-aged man looked coldly at Zhou Xian. You human, you. At this moment the word dream quietly appeared between Zhou Xian's eyebrows. The next moment the middle-aged man's head flew off. Zhou Xian was still standing where he was. Looking at the head that had flown away, he said calmly, I told you to shut up but you didn't. Then shut up forever. As he spoke, he looked at the old man with an extremely gloomy expression. I'm very angry now. As soon as he spoke, the heads of the 4 experts in golden armor to the right of him and the archhound suddenly flew off at the same time. Blood spurted out like a fountain. Chapter 502. Anger. That was what Zhou Xian was feeling at the moment. The old man stared at Zhou Xian. At this moment, there was a hint of fear in his eyes. Instant kill. The speed at which Zhou Xian had attacked was terrifying. Even the old man had only been able to sense a vague trace. Moreover, when Zhou Xian had attacked, there seemed to be a mysterious power. It was because of this mysterious power that the middle-aged man and the others had been unable to retaliate at all. At that moment, the emperor dog suddenly said, What are you trying to do? The emperor dog's eyes were filled with ruthlessness. Zhou Xian was not the only one who was angry. The emperor dog was truly enraged as well. The woman next to Zhou Xian looked at the old man and asked, Elder Ji, what do you mean? The old man said coldly, What do I mean? As he said that, he looked at Zhou Xian and said, This human killed my people, yet you brought him into the god clan. You still ask me what I mean? The woman looked straight at the old man and said, He is a guest of the god clan. The old man sneered, Guest? Lianwan, are you joking? You actually treat a human as a guest, you. At that moment the emperor dog next to Zhou Xian suddenly charged forward. The old man's expression changed and he crossed his arms in front of him to block it. Bang! With a loud explosion, the old man was instantly knocked back hundreds of meters by the emperor dog. In the next moment the emperor dog charged at the old man again. At that moment, some golden armored guards suddenly appeared around them. The woman suddenly waved her right hand and said, Stand down. The golden armored guards hesitated for a moment before retreating to the side. On the stone steps, the emperor dog and the old man were already fighting. Next to the woman, Zhou Xian said, It seems that your position in the god clan is not that secure. The woman called Lianwan was expressionless and did not speak. Zhou Xian looked up at the sky. At that moment the emperor dog had completely suppressed the old man. However, the old man was not weak either. Therefore it was clear that the man and the beast would not be able to determine a victor in a short period of time. At this moment Zhou Xian gently pointed with his fingers. In the air the expression of the old man fighting the emperor hound suddenly changed. In the next instant he dodged 1,000 feet to the left. As soon as the old man stopped, his arms suddenly fell off his shoulders. Lian Wan'er took a deep look at Zhou Xian, and there was a hint of seriousness and fear in her eyes. In the air the armless old man was greatly shocked. He retreated rapidly until he was right in front of the shrine. The emperor hound did not attack again. It returned to Zhou Xian's side and looked at Lian Wan'er. I want to borrow the holy spring. Lian Wan'er hesitated. The monarch hound's expression turned cold. Am I not qualified? Lian Wan'er sighed in a low voice. Of course you are qualified, but there isn't much of the holy spring left now, the sovereign hound said. I don't need much, just a little to recover. Lian Wan'er looked at the emperor hound. If you recover, will you stay in the clan? Yi Xian also looked at the monarch hound. The monarch hound was silent. Yi Xian smiled. Brother monarch hound, if you want to stay here, I will respect your decision. The monarch hound shook its head. I promise to follow you for 3 years, so it will be 3 years. Hearing this, Lian Wan'er frowned. But you are a god, the monarch hound said impatiently. Back then I risked my life for the god clan. Now I can't even use a little holy spring? Lian Wan'er fell silent. The monarch hound's expression gradually turned cold, and its eyes filled with undisguised killing intent. Seeing this, Lian Wan'er's expression sank. You can use the holy spring, but I have a condition. After 3 years you must return to the god clan. The monarch hound shook its head. I won't be coming back. Lian Wan'er frowned. Why? The monarch hound looked around and then said softly, this god clan gives me a strange feeling. Strange. At this moment, it no longer had any beautiful fantasies of revitalizing the god clan. It could not see any hope for such a clan. Lian Wan'er still wanted to say something, but the monarch hound shook its head. Take me to the holy spring. I won't need much. Lian Wan'er glanced at the monarch hound and said, come with me. After saying that, she turned and left. In the end, she still chose to give it to the holy spring because she knew that if she did not, the monarch hound would definitely snatch it. The current monarch hound was not very scary, but the swordsman next to it was not an ordinary kind of scary. She was more afraid of Yi Xian's flying sword. Soon Lian Wan'er brought the monarch hound to a pool. In the middle of the pool there was a whirlpool. Lian Wan'er pointed at the whirlpool in the distance. That's it. The monarch hound nodded slightly and leaped into the whirlpool. Beside Yi Xian, Lian Wan'er asked softly, are the humans very strong in the outside world now? Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. Were the humans weak in the god clan's era? Lian Wan'er nodded. Very weak. At that time, the humans didn't even have their own martial arts civilization. Yi Xian said softly, times have changed. Lian Wan'er looked at the sky, somewhat at a loss. Indeed, this is no longer the god clan's era. Yi Xian looked at Lian Wan'er. He had to admit that this woman was very beautiful. She belonged to the type that was breathtaking at first glance. At this time, Lian Wan'er looked at Yi Xian. You and it must have other reasons for coming to my god clan this time. Yi Xian looked at the whirlpool in the distance. It wants to revitalize the god clan. Lian Wan'er shook her head. Difficult? Yi Xian asked, do you know Zhenzizai? Hearing this, Lian Wan'er's expression changed drastically. She stared at Yi Xian. How do you know her? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, she's my sister. Lian Wan'er said coldly, impossible. You are not a member of my god clan. My god clan's divine child has fallen in the past. You, divine child? Yi Xian was stunned. He turned and pointed at the emperor dog in the whirlpool not far away. Do you know why it is following me? Lian Wan'er's expression turned ugly. You can't be the divine child. The divine child has fallen. At this point she seemed to have thought of something. She looked at Yi Xian in shock. You are the reincarnation of a god? Yi Xian was expressionless. I didn't say anything. Lian Wan'er looked at Yi Xian for a long time. She said coldly, impossible. If you are the reincarnation of a divine child, she will never let you go. Yi Xian said calmly, she even let the emperor dog go. Why wouldn't she let me go? Lian Wan'er was silent. Her expression was somewhat gloomy. At this time Yi Xian said, of course the rise and fall of the god clan has nothing to do with me. If brother emperor dog hadn't asked me to come, I wouldn't have come. As for my sister Zhenzizai, I don't intend to let her come either. As if thinking of something, Lian Wan'er hurriedly said, You mean she no longer hates the god clan? Yi Xian said calmly, if she still hates the god clan, why would the emperor dog and I return here? Lian Wan'er was silent. At this moment the whirlpool not far away suddenly trembled. Soon the emperor dog flew out and landed in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian found that the emperor dog seemed to have changed. The emperor dog glanced at Yi Xian. Let's go. Yi Xian nodded. At this moment, Lian Wan'er suddenly looked at the emperor dog. He is the divine child of the god clan? The emperor dog was stunned. Yi Xian suddenly said, don't you want to help the god clan? I think this method will work. Emperor dog, Seeing that the emperor dog was stunned, Lian Wan'er frowned. At this time the emperor dog suddenly said, "How do you know?" Lian Wan'er said, "Is he really?" The emperor dog was about to speak when Yi Xian said calmly, "Why are you mentioning this? The rise and fall of the God clan has nothing to do with me. Even if it did, it would have happened in my previous life. It has nothing to do with me in this life." The emperor dog said angrily, "How can it have nothing to do with you? You are the divine child of the God clan. The prosperity of the God clan is your responsibility." Yi Xian coldly snorted. "The revival of the God clan? Sorry, I don't see any hope. Let's go." The emperor dog was about to say something when Lian Wan'er suddenly said, "How can you think that?" Yi Xian looked at Lian Wan'er. The latter said, "There are only 10,000 God clan members left, and they can only struggle at death's door. Do you have the heart to watch the God clan continue to decline?" Yi Xian looked at Lian Wan'er and said, "It's not that I have the heart to watch the God clan decline, but the God clan has chosen to decline." Lian Wan'er looked at Yi Xian. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian sneered. "What do I mean? The God clan is still arrogant. They have no strength, yet they look down on everyone. With this mentality, how can they revive?" Lian Wan'er's face was a bit ugly. Yi Xian continued, "If the God clan really wants to revive, you must first put down the arrogance in your hearts." At this point he looked at Lian Wan'er. "I think you haven't gone out yet. I suggest you go out and see the outside world." Then he looked at the emperor dog. "Let's go." The emperor dog nodded. Yi Xian left with the emperor dog. But after a few steps, Lian Wan'er suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She looked at the emperor dog and asked, "You know Jane? Princess Jane?" The emperor dog nodded. "He knows her." Lian Wan'er said, "She really doesn't hate the God clan now?" The emperor dog said, "If she does, she won't let me go." As it spoke, it looked at Lian Wan'er and sent her a voice transmission with profound energy. "You have seen his strength and talent. If the God clan really wants to revive, there will be some hope with him. Otherwise, the God clan can only linger here forever, waiting for a genius to appear." Lian Wan'er was silent for a long time. Then she said, "He doesn't care about the God clan." The emperor dog said in a low voice, "You don't care about him, so why should he care about the God clan? Moreover, Jane, she thinks highly of him. She even personally asked the Underworld King for the Underworld clan's supreme treasure, the soul-subduing sword." The Underworld King. Lian Wan'er frowned slightly. "The Underworld King is also here?" The emperor dog nodded. It looked at Lian Wan'er. "You are now the leader of the God clan. The future of the God clan is up to you." It still cared about the God clan and hoped that the God clan could be on good terms with Yi Xian. Because after interacting with Yi Xian, it found that even though Yi Xian was usually slippery, he was still very moral. If the God clan were to be on good terms with Yi Xian, it would only bring harm and no benefit. Lian Wan'er was silent for a moment, and then she looked at Yi Xian. "If you lead the God clan, how will it revive?" Yi Xian thought about it and said, "How many treasures does the God clan have now?" Lian Wan'er, the emperor dog. Chapter 503. The Emperor Hound's expression was somewhat strange. Treasures. After interacting with Yi Xian, it understood Yi Xian's character very well. This was definitely a fellow who valued wealth as much as his life. Lian Wan'er looked at Yi Xian warily. "Why are you doing this?" Yi Xian's face sank. "What's with your expressions? Do you think I'm coveting the god race's treasures?" The Emperor Hound glanced indifferently at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Lian Wan'er became even more vigilant. Yi Xian sighed softly. "The reason I ask this is because I want to know the current wealth of the god race. If we don't have any wealth at all, how can we develop?" Lian Wan'er fell silent for a moment before she said, "The god race didn't leave behind many treasures and violet origin crystals. Now, my god race has 12 creation realm treasures, 172 immortal artifacts, and 372 divine artifacts. There should be close to 10 billion violet origin crystals." Next to him, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. 12 creation realm treasures. 12. Yi Xian was stunned. He only had 4 creation realm treasures now. They were the soul-suppressing sword, the Moke sword, the Emperor starship, and the pair of unknown arms. He knew very well how powerful these four creation realm treasures were, especially the soul-suppressing sword. It could split a person's soul with a single strike and kill without a sound. It could be said to be extremely terrifying. He hadn't expected the god race to have 12. Moreover, there were close to 200 immortal artifacts. And by Lai's violet origin crystals. Rich. Not just any rich. Right at this moment, Lianwana said, besides these, my god clan has another precious treasure. A Dao realm precious treasure. Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound looked at Lianwan. Lianwana said, the Divine King's throne. The Divine King's throne. Yi Xian said, this is a Dao realm treasure? Lianwana nodded. But no one in my god race can use it. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Why? The Emperor Hound said, only those with royal blood can use it. Royal bloodline. Yi Xian was stunned. Didn't this mean that only Jian Zizai could use it? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian looked at Lianwana and asked, can you take me there? Lianwana hesitated for a moment and said, it's best that you don't. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why? Lianwana said, this thing is sealed in one place. It is incomparably violent and we don't dare to approach it. Yi Xian smiled and said, it's fine, you can take me there to have a look. Lianwana nodded. Follow me. With that she turned around and left. Beside Yi Xian, the Sovereign Hound wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xian smiled and said, Brother D is worried that I only want the celestial race's treasures and not sincerely want to help the celestial race, right? The Emperor Dog nodded. That's exactly what I think. Yi Xian smiled and said, I'll tell you the truth. Although I want the celestial race's treasures, I also sincerely want to help the celestial race. The Emperor Dog looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, there are two reasons. First, it's because of you. Brother Sovereign Hound, you've helped me a lot. Second, I also hope that the celestial race is strong enough. A strong celestial race is also good for me. Allies. The incident in the never-ending starfield made him realize that one person's strength was still a little weak. If possible, there was no harm in making more friends and allies. The Emperor Dog nodded and did not speak again. It would be best if the celestial race and Yi Xian could help each other. Especially the relationship between Yi Xian and Jian Zizai. Could see that Jian Zizai cared a lot about Yi Xian. Otherwise, he would not have asked Hades for the soul-subduing sword. In addition, it found that Yi Xian was not a simple guy. That tower, the sword on top of the tower. In short, in its heart, Yi Xian was a very mysterious guy. If the celestial race and Yi Xian joined forces, it would be a good thing for both Yi Xian and the celestial race. After a while, Lianwan brought Yi Xian and the Emperor Dog to a secret room. The secret room was surrounded by all kinds of mysterious talismans. In addition, there were black chains as thick as an arm. Lianwana looked at Yi Xian and said, it's inside. Yi Xian nodded and was about to go in. At that moment, Lianwana said, be careful. Yi Xian asked, how long have you trapped it? Lianwana shook her head. A very, very long time. I don't know exactly how long. I only know that when the older generation was still here, it was already trapped here. Yi Xian said softly, it seems that it hasn't been trapped for long. As he said that, he pushed open the door of the secret room and walked in. The secret room was empty. In the center there was a chair. The chair looked like an ordinary chair. There was nothing special about it. On the back of the chair there was a sword. A sword with a golden scabbard. Yi Xian walked in front of the chair. Beside him was the Emperor Dog. At that moment he and the Emperor Dog were both on guard. A Dao realm treasure. This was the first time he had seen one. As for the World Prison Tower, it was a supreme treasure in his heart. Yi Xian looked at the Divine King's throne. Is this chair very powerful? The Emperor Dog's expression was somewhat serious. Very powerful. Back then my celestial race's patriarch relied on it to contend against her. Her? Yi Xian was stunned. Soon he knew who the Emperor Dog was talking about. Jian Zizai. Needless to say, what Jian Zizai did in the past was very bloody. Because he found that the celestial race was really afraid of Jian Zizai. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian looked at the Emperor Dog. Contend against her? Are you saying that your celestial race's patriarch relied on this to contend against her? The Emperor Dog nodded. He only resisted for a while and then, there was no then. Yi Xian was speechless. Jian Zizai. Yi Xian looked at the Divine King's throne. He found that Jian Zizai's strength might not be much weaker than Emperor Xing. Of course, there was definitely a gap. Otherwise, Jian Zizai would not be one level lower than Emperor Xing. Of course, in terms of intelligence, Jian Zizai was definitely above Emperor Xing. Because Jian Zizai gave up the World Prison Tower. It should be said that Jian Zizai was not as arrogant as Emperor Xing. People who were arrogant usually died quickly. At that moment, the Emperor Dog suddenly pointed at the Divine King's throne. Do you see that sword? Yi Xian looked at the sword with the golden scabbard. What sword is that? The Emperor Dog said, the Divine King's sword. It is as famous as the soul-suppressing sword of the Nether race. It was as famous as soul-suppressing sword. Yi Xian was stunned. Then he said, as famous as soul-suppressing sword? The Emperor Dog nodded. Yi Xian looked at the Divine King's sword. His heart was burning. If it was as famous as soul-suppressing sword, it meant that the sword's effect was definitely not lower than soul's. One had to know that soul-suppressing sword's effect was somewhat heaven-defying. It could be said that soul-suppressing sword and soul-setting sword could be considered his most powerful move in close combat. At that moment, the Divine King's throne suddenly trembled. The expressions of Yi Xian and the Emperor Dog changed. The two of them took a few steps back. The Emperor Dog said in a low voice, if you want it, you must sit on it. Sit on it. Yi Xian looked at the Emperor Dog. If I sit on it, can I still get down? The Emperor Dog said in a low voice, I don't know. Yi Xian was speechless. At that moment, Lian Wana walked in. She looked at Yi Xian and said, if you can subdue it, no one in my god race will refuse to submit to you. And you will also be able to obtain a Dao realm treasure. Yi Xian said, you don't seem to mind if I take this Divine King's throne away. Lian Wana said softly, this item is left here. To us, it is an uncertain factor because no one in the god race can control it. If you can subdue it and take it away, I can't ask for more. Yi Xian looked at the Divine King's throne. He walked in front of it. As he looked at the Divine King's throne, Yi Xian's expression gradually turned serious. This Divine King's throne looked like an ordinary chair, but he knew that if he sat on it he probably wouldn't be able to get down. The Emperor Dog said in a low voice, do you want to try? Lian Wana also looked at Yi Xian. She wanted to let Yi Xian try because she wanted to see if Yi Xian was the reincarnation of the Son of God. Moreover, she also wanted to see Yi Xian's true strength. If Yi Xian couldn't take it away, then this Divine King's throne would still belong to the god race. If Yi Xian could take it away, then it proved that even if Yi Xian wasn't the reincarnation of the Son of God, he was definitely not an ordinary person. This kind of person was worth befriending. Moreover, as she said, this Divine King's throne was useless to the god race. On the contrary, it was a threat. Because not only could the god race not subdue the Divine King's throne, no one could continue sealing it. Once the sealing time was up, the god race would be in danger. In front of the Divine King's throne, Yi Xian stood for a long time. To sit or not to sit? Yi Xian didn't think too much about it and directly sat on it. The timid would starve to death, the bold would die. Of course, the reason why he was so confident was because of the World Prison Pagoda. No matter how powerful this Divine King's throne was, could it be more powerful than the World Prison Pagoda? He had already decided that if he couldn't do it, he would just drag the throne into the pagoda. However, just as he sat on the Divine King's throne, it suddenly shook violently. The next moment Yi Xian disappeared. Seeing this, Lian Wana and the Emperor Hound were stunned. Where did he go? Lian Wana looked around and finally looked at the Emperor Hound. The Emperor Hound's face was gloomy, and it was unknown what it was thinking. At this moment, a petite figure suddenly appeared in front of the Emperor Hound and Lian Wana. It was Xiaoling. Xiaoling looked around, then looked at the Emperor Hound. Where is he? The Emperor Hound naturally knew who Xiaoling was talking about. It immediately pointed at the Divine King's throne. He was taken away. Xiaoling's face darkened. The Emperor Hound asked, "What's wrong?" Xiaoling said, "He's in danger. I can feel that he's in danger." As she spoke, she suddenly pointed at the Divine King's throne angrily. "Hand him over." The Emperor Hound, Lian Wana's expression was also somewhat strange. Seeing that the Divine King's throne didn't respond, Xiaoling flew into a rage and slapped the throne. Bang! This slap sent Xiaoling flying into the wall. causing the entire wall to shake violently. On the ground, Xiaoling crawled up and rubbed her little but feeling extremely wronged. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pointed at the Divine King's throne. You wait. You can't run. After saying that, she disappeared directly. Lianwan looked at the Emperor Hound. What is she doing? The Emperor Hound said in a low voice. I don't know, but it's not anything good. At this moment, Xiaoling appeared in front of the Emperor Hound and Lianwan. In her hand there was a sword. Seeing this sword, the Emperor Hound's expression changed. Not far away, Xiaoling suddenly rushed towards the Divine King's throne with the sword. I'll chop you to death. Not far away, the Divine King's throne suddenly turned and ran. The Emperor Hound. At this moment, Lianwan's expression suddenly changed. Her sword is breaking the seal. Hurry up and make her stop. The Emperor Hound didn't move. Lianwan looked at the Emperor Hound. The Emperor Hound said in a low voice, I'm afraid of being cut. Lianwan Chapter 504. Afraid of being cut. The Emperor Dog was also very afraid of that sword. In any case, it didn't dare to block the enraged Xiaoling. This little guy had a very bad temper. When it was angry, no one could stop it except Zhou Xian. In the distance, the God King's throne was clearly also afraid of the sword in Xiaolinger's hand. It immediately turned and ran, but it couldn't run out of the secret room. So inside the secret room, Xiaoling chased after the God King's throne with the sword. And the Emperor Dog hurriedly left the secret room. Seeing this, Lianwan also hurriedly left the secret room. Outside the secret room, Lianwan looked at the Emperor Dog. You're not going to stop it? The Emperor Dog said indifferently, they're all big shots, we can't afford to offend them. Lianwan. The Emperor Dog walked to the side, lay on the ground and began to recover its body. It hadn't completely absorbed the holy water from the holy spring. Lianwan looked at the Emperor Dog. Aren't you worried? The Emperor Dog said indifferently, what's there to worry about? That kid's life is very tough. It knew that Zhou Xian had that tower on him, so he usually wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Especially since the tower was in Zhou Xian's body. If the God King's throne wanted to kill Zhou Xian, the God King's throne would definitely be out of luck. No, the God King's throne was already out of luck. The God King's throne was a Dao realm treasure, but it knew that it definitely couldn't withstand that sword. The Emperor Dog stopped thinking about Zhou Xian and the God King's throne, and began to focus on recovering its body. Lianwan looked into the secret room. The enraged Xiaoling was still chasing after the God King's throne. And where was Zhou Xian now? When Zhou Xian sat on the God King's throne, he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already on a battlefield. A battlefield. Zhou Xian looked around. There were corpses everywhere, and the surroundings were filled with the pungent smell of blood. What was this place? Zhou Xian frowned. He walked forward and there was the sound of water under his feet. No, it was all blood. Illusion. Zhou Xian's sword will spread out in all directions. But soon Zhou Xian's frown deepened. Because he realized that his surroundings didn't seem to be an illusion, but reality. Zhou Xian looked around. Gusts of wind were blowing and it was very eerie. Test. After a moment of silence, Zhou Xian continued walking forward. Not long after, he suddenly stopped because he discovered that the corpse on the ground was wriggling. Suddenly, a corpse in front of him stood up and then it pounced towards him. However, this corpse hadn't even approached him when it was slashed into pieces by a strand of light. But in the next moment, another corpse stood up and charged towards him. Not only that, but all the corpses on the ground slowly stood up. Seeing this scene, Zhou Xian frowned slightly. What the hell is going on? At this time, the surrounding corpses were already rushing towards him. Zhou Xian pressed his fingers together and pointed lightly, and a flying sword flew out. In an instant, the corpses around him were slashed into two at the waist. But in the next moment, more and more corpses charged towards him. More and more corpses appeared, and there were so many that his flying sword wasn't able to kill them all. Zhou Xian opened his palm and a sword appeared in his hand. The next moment he dashed forward and slashed out a beam of sword light. In an instant, hundreds of corpses in front of him were directly cut into pieces by this beam of sword light. Zhou Xian charged forward with his sword in hand because he saw white light at the end of the road. All along the way Yi Xian could be said to be unstoppable. But it wasn't long before he was stopped. Because the number of corpses was increasing. Up until now there were at least 1,000,000 corpses blocking his path. I can't kill them all. Yi Xian's expression was slightly unsightly because he noticed that the number of corpses was increasing. And it was to the point that his hands were tired from killing them. What kind of test is this? Yi Xian didn't have time to think too much about it. All he could do now was kill madly. Just like that, after 2 hours, Yi Xian realized that he was slightly exhausted. However, if he relaxed even a little, the corpses would pounce on him. Right at this moment, Soul's voice suddenly resounded. Young lord, this is a test for you. Yi Xian slashed out with his sword and the corpses in front of him were instantly pulverized. At the same time, 2 flying swords flew around him incessantly. Yi Xian wiped his face and said, Test me for what? Soul said, If I'm not wrong, this should be the famous trial of the god race, the Azura trial. The Azura trial? Yi Xian frowned slightly. I've never heard of it. Soul explained, This is the most difficult trial of the god race. In the god race, only the imperial family is qualified to take this trial. If young lord successfully passes this trial, not only will you obtain the divine king throne and the divine king sword, but you will also obtain the power of Azura. Yi Xian rushed forward and everywhere he passed, countless corpses were pulverized. Then he waved his sword and said, The power of Azura? Soul said, The power of Azura is a very strong power, several times stronger than your power of Moku. After a moment Yi Xian asked, How do I pass this trial? Soul said in a low voice, I don't know. Yi Xian, Soul said again, I only know that there is a saying in the god race. How can one obtain the power of Azura without experiencing Azura hell? Azura hell. Yi Xian looked into the distance. In front of him was still a sea of corpses. There were so many of them that they seemed endless. Can't kill them all. That was what Yi Xian was thinking at this moment. Why kill them all? This thought suddenly flew into Yi Xian's mind. The next moment Yi Xian gently stamped his right foot and his whole body soared into the sky. At the same time, a flying sword appeared under his feet. Then his whole body turned into a sword light and disappeared not far away. Below, countless corpses looked up at Yi Xian. In the air Yi Xian laughed loudly. Just like that Yi Xian flew through the air on his sword. When he looked down he still felt some lingering fear. There were at least millions of corpses on the ground below. If he relied on killing alone he estimated that he would not be able to kill them all in a year. After a while Yi Xian saw a huge statue and around this statue the corpses were far away not daring to approach. Yi Xian stopped and landed in front of the statue. The statue had the appearance of a middle-aged man, wearing a loose golden robe with a sword hanging from his waist. The God King's sword. Right at this moment the statue suddenly opened its eyes. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. This fellow is alive? The statue looked down at Yi Xian with an indifferent gaze. You don't have the bloodline of my god race, so why are you able to come here? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, I went the wrong way. Why don't you send me back? The statue flared up with rage. How presumptuous. This is a sacred place. How dare you disrespect it? As it spoke, a powerful pressure suddenly crushed down from within its body. Right at this moment Yi Xian suddenly appeared behind the statue and 2 sword lights flickered behind him. The statue had been slashed by the sword lights, but it was completely unharmed. Yi Xian immediately rode his sword and fled very quickly. But suddenly the space in front of him warped. In the next moment he appeared in front of the statue once more. The statue looked down at him with an indifferent gaze. Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. Senior, we can talk. The statue looked down at Yi Xian. Who exactly are you? Yi Xian thought for a moment and was about to speak when the statue suddenly shouted angrily, Come out. As soon as the voice fell, the soul-suppressing sword was forcefully brought out. The mysterious power was forcefully brought out. When he saw the soul-suppressing sword, Yi Xian cursed inwardly. He didn't forget that the god race and the soul race were sworn enemies in the past. Soul-suppressing sword. The statue frowned slightly. After a moment it looked at Yi Xian. You're from the nether race. Yi Xian shook his head. I'm a human. The statue asked, Then why do you have the nether race's soul-suppressing sword? Yi Xian said, My sister gave it to me. Who's your sister? Jian's Zai. Jian Zizai? Yi Xian nodded. The statue asked, "Who is Jian Zizai?" At this point its expression suddenly changed. "It's her." Yi Xian's heart relaxed. So this guy knew Jian Zizai. After a moment of silence the statue asked again, "Where is she now?" Yi Xian said, "She went somewhere else." The statue was silent. After a moment, the statue's expression gradually became a little complicated. "She is the most outstanding person in the history of my god race." As it said that, it looked at Yi Xian. "Human, you are also very outstanding. Unfortunately, you are not from my god race." Yi Xian said, "Do you know that the god race has declined?" The statue nodded, its expression becoming more and more complicated. Yi Xian looked at the statue. "You also think I am outstanding, so why don't you invest in me? Maybe I can bring the god race back to glory?" The statue looked at Yi Xian. "Are all humans as thick-skinned as you?" Yi Xian was silent. Thick-skinned? In this world the most useless thing was thick-skinned. What was the use of it? A shameless person was invincible. The statue was also silent, as if thinking about something. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Senior, although I am not from the god race, but..." At this moment the statue suddenly said, "You can become the god of my god race." Yi Xian was stunned. The statue looked down at Yi Xian. "Although you have a human body, you can become the god of my god race." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What does senior mean?" The statue said, "Blood exchange. I can give you the blood of my original body. At that time, my blood will transform your body and make you a true god of my god race." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, don't joke around." He didn't want to become a god. He just wanted to be himself. The statue said coldly, "What? You don't want to be the god of my god race?" Yi Xian nodded. "Senior, I just want to be myself." After saying that he turned and left. However, he had only taken a few steps when a powerful force directly enveloped him. Yi Xian's face changed. "Senior, you won't use force, will you?" The statue looked down at him. "I can't wait any longer. And you, if you become the god of my god race may have a hope of revival. So it's not up to you." As the voice fell, Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled violently. At the same time, a corpse appeared in front of him. This corpse looked exactly the same as the statue behind him. Yi Xian urged the flying sword, but he found that the flying sword disappeared as soon as it appeared. Yi Xian's face changed. Little soul," said with some grievance. "Young lord, I'm also locked. I can't move." Yi Xian was about to speak. At this moment, from the corpse in front of him, a stream of blood suddenly flew out and entered his body. Yi Xian's eyes instantly widened. He felt his body burning. However, at this moment, a horrified voice suddenly sounded behind him. "How is this possible? Your blood is actually devouring this king's divine blood. How is this possible?" "No. No." Chapter 505. At this moment Yi Xian's entire body was burning like fire, and inside his body the divine king's blood was being devoured. Behind Yi Xian the divine king's face was full of disbelief. This continued for about an hour before Yi Xian felt a little better. At this time he felt a great power hidden in his body. As if thinking of something, he suddenly turned to look at the divine king. "My blood has been swapped?" The divine king looked at him without saying anything. At this time, Soul's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. "Young lord, his blood has been swallowed by you." "Swallowed?" Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, "What do you mean?" Soul said, "After his blood entered your body, young lord, it couldn't beat your blood, so it was swallowed by your blood." "Yi Xian," Soul said again, "your blood hasn't been swapped. On the contrary, your blood has swallowed his blood and your body is changing." Yi Xian hurriedly looked at his body, and sure enough his body was now wriggling. Yi Xian looked at the divine king, who had now calmed down. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, the divine king suddenly said, "Did any of your ancestors have any strong masters?" "Ancestors?" Yi Xian thought about it, then shook his head. "I don't know." He really didn't know if there were any strong masters in the Yi family's ancestors. He knew very little about the Yi family's history. The divine king looked at Yi Xian with a rather complicated expression. "The power of your bloodline is very strong, but this bloodline is hidden and you haven't activated it. Soul also said, "Young lord, this divine king's blood is very powerful, and your blood can swallow his blood, so it's really, really powerful. Young lord, either your father is very powerful or your ancestors were very powerful." Bloodline. Zhou Xian was silent. Only his mother, Zhou Xian, knew about bloodlines. It seemed like he would have to ask her when he had the time. At this time, the God King suddenly said, "You have already absorbed my blood, and now my blood is transforming your body. Sit down, I will teach you the divine blood technique." Zhou Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, the blood has modified my body." The divine king said, "Don't worry, you're still you. My blood can't suppress your original blood, so I've already become your nourishment." Zhou Xian was speechless. The divine king continued, "Sit down cross-legged, I will teach you how to absorb this blood, and also teach you the divine blood art." Zhou Xian nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. At this time the God King's voice resounded in his mind, "Blood is the root of man. Its potential is boundless. If you can unleash its potential, your power will be limitless." Zhou Xian asked, "Blood?" The divine king said, "This divine blood art is a forbidden art of my god race. Ordinary people are unable to control it." Zhou Xian asked, "Can I control it?" The divine king said, "Yes." This divine blood art is incomparably powerful, but it has a fatal flaw, and that is the power of bloodline. If the opponent's bloodline is stronger than yours, you will undoubtedly be seeking death by using this art. Therefore, if you want to learn this art, your bloodline must be strong enough, and your bloodline power is very strong. Very strong. When the divine king said this, his expression was solemn. He knew very well what level his bloodline power had reached. His blood was a pure divine emperor bloodline, but it was suppressed by Zhou Xian's blood and even devoured, completely defeated. His divine emperor bloodline was completely defeated. This was also why he was not angry and instead wanted to rope in Zhou Xian. A person with such a bloodline must have an extraordinary background. For the god race, it was better to have a friend than an enemy. 2 hours later, Zhou Xian's expression gradually became solemn, because he discovered that this divine blood art was truly terrifying. Blood control. This divine blood art could control blood, and it could also devour blood to continuously nourish the body. In other words, as long as he had enough blood, his power was endless. It could be said that as long as he kept killing, he could obtain endless power. Azure power. Zhou Xian hurriedly asked, "Senior, this divine blood art refers to Azure power?" The God King nodded. In the past, the outsiders did indeed call this the power of Azure. As long as you continue to kill, you will be able to obtain an endless supply of blood. In this situation, in theory, you will never fall. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have enough blood. Saying this, he paused slightly and then said, "However, you must remember that this art has a flaw. After absorbing blood power to a certain extent, you will enter a bloodthirsty state." Zhou Xian was somewhat puzzled. Bloodthirsty state? The divine king explained, "In the bloodthirsty state, your blood will boil and your power will increase by at least 10 times. However, in this situation, if you are not careful, your body will not be able to withstand the power of your blood, and your body will directly collapse. Moreover, your mind may be corroded by the killing." Zhou Xian's expression was somewhat ugly. This thing had a huge side effect. The divine king suddenly said, "If you don't want to learn, it's fine." Zhou Xian fell silent. Blood control. Thinking of this, a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. The next moment, the corner of his mouth slightly rose. "Learn? Why wouldn't I learn? Senior, please teach me well." The divine king glanced at Zhou Xian and nodded slightly. "Calm your qi and focus." Just like this, Zhou Xian slowly entered an ethereal state. In the secret room, Xiaoling did not chase after the divine king's throne, because she was tired. Xiaoling hugged her sword and sat in a corner, panting, but she still stared at the divine king's throne in the distance. The divine king's throne was also in a corner, extremely vigilant. It was a Dao realm divine weapon, but its instincts told it that the sword was very dangerous. If it was slashed by the sword, it would definitely be very, very tragic. At this moment, Xiaoling took out a pile of spirit fruits and started to eat. After a while, she felt that she had strength again. Thus, she hugged the sword and rushed towards the divine king's throne. Outside the secret room, Lianwan looked at the divine king's throne in the secret room, thinking about something. At this moment a group of people suddenly walked over. Lian Wan'er turned around, and when she saw the people who came she suddenly frowned. The leader was an old man wearing a loose robe. His eyes were cold and he did not come with good intentions. The old man walked in front of Lian Wan'er, and Lian Wan'er bowed slightly, saying softly, "Teacher Mo." Teacher Mo, the God race's technique imparting elder, had a very high status in the God race. Teacher Mo looked coldly at Lian Wan'er. "I heard that you led a human into the secret room." Lian Wan'er nodded, "Yes." Teacher Mo's eyes became colder. "You want to give the Divine King's throne to a human?" Lian Wan'er was about to speak, but Teacher Mo suddenly said angrily, "Are you crazy? The Divine King's throne is our God race's treasure and you actually gave it to an outsider, you." As he spoke, he directly led the group into the secret room. Inside the secret room, Xianxia, who was chasing after the Divine King's throne, stopped. She glanced at the old man and the others, feeling a little weak. She was a little afraid of humans. Because back in the firmament world she had been bullied by humans to no end. But she did not know that she was actually very good at fighting. Xianxia blinked, then hugged her sword and retreated to a corner. Teacher Mo glanced at Xianxia, frowning slightly. "Who are you?" Xianxia took out a spirit fruit and ate it. She looked calm on the surface, but inside she was panicking. Seeing that Xianxia did not speak, Teacher Mo waved his right hand. "Take her down first." As he spoke, the two guards behind him directly rushed towards Xianxia. Seeing this, Xianxia's expression changed. In the next moment she closed her eyes, hugged her sword and slashed wildly. After a breath, the place suddenly quietened down. Everyone was looking in front of Xianxia. In front of Xianxia, the two guards had already been turned into pieces. Teacher Mo looked at Xianxia in shock. "You?" Xianxia sneaked a glance, and when she saw the pieces of the corpses she was stunned. "Are they dead?" Everyone. Xianxia looked at the sword in her hand, then at Teacher Mo and the others, a little confused. "I killed them?" Everyone. At this moment Xianxia said softly, "Are humans so weak?" Not far away, Lian Wan'er and the others' mouths twitched. Xianxia seemed to have thought it through. She hugged her sword and pointed at Teacher Mo. Are you going to bully me?" Teacher Mo narrowed his eyes, and in the next moment he suddenly disappeared. Xianxia's expression changed and she closed her eyes and slashed forward with force. Rumble. With this slash, the surrounding space suddenly collapsed, and the entire secret room instantly turned into nothingness. At the same time, Teacher Mo, who was in front of Xianxia, was sent flying. This time he was sent flying for a full 300 meters. Everyone present was dumbfounded. Xianxia was also stunned, but soon she jumped in joy. "So humans are so weak." Not far away, the emperor dog glanced at Xianxia and shook its head. In fact, Xianxia was also very strong, but she just did not know that she was strong. Especially now, Xianxia and that sword could be said to be a bit heaven-defying. Because the increase in battle strength brought by that sword was too terrifying. Unfortunately, Zhou Xian couldn't use it, or it would be even more heaven-defying. It didn't understand why Xianxia could use it, but Zhou Xian couldn't. Fear had already appeared in the eyes of the God race's experts. Fear. They really were quite afraid. Suddenly, all of them turned around to look at Teacher Mo. They watched as Teacher Mo's body started to crumble inch by inch, and it didn't take long for only his soul to remain. Moreover, his soul was extremely ethereal, and it seemed like it would vanish at any moment. Teacher Mo gazed at Xianxia, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. "You?" Xianxia was about to speak, but her eyes suddenly lit up. After that she turned around and took out a small box. She opened the box and muttered something. The emperor dog was quite curious and it listened attentively. "Oh. All right. Tonghulu is delicious. The 7th floor? Is it a treasure? I can't go in. Do you want to play with me? Is he killing someone? Who's he?" The emperor dog was speechless. "P.S. I'm sorry. I went on a date with a few girls yesterday, so I woke up late today. Please forgive me." Chapter 506. Just like that, Xianxia muttered for around an hour before she stopped. The Emperor Hound didn't understand either. None of the God race experts dared to move. Especially after they saw Xianxia destroy Mo Shi's body with a single slash. All of them felt fear towards this little girl. fear. They were truly afraid of Xiaoling. At this moment Xiaoling suddenly put the box away and turned to look at the Divine King's throne. The Divine King's throne took a few steps back. Clearly it was slightly fearful. Xiaoling was clearly very happy. Her face was filled with a radiant smile. She didn't attack. Instead she hugged her sword, turned around and vanished. At this moment she'd forgotten about Zhou Xian. Everyone heaved sighs of relief when they saw Zhou Xian vanish. The Emperor Hound heaved a sigh of relief as well. It was quite troubled by this sword-hugging Xiaoling. At this moment, it seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked at the Divine King's throne. Lianwan also looked at the Divine King's throne. The secret room had been destroyed by Xiaoling sword. In other words, the seal had been removed, but the Divine King's throne was still there. The Divine King's throne didn't run? The Emperor Hound and Lianwan glanced at each other. They didn't understand why the Divine King's throne didn't run. At this moment, Immorse suddenly floated over. Lianwan looked at Immorse, who said solemnly, "Who is she?" Although his body had been destroyed, he'd calmed down. A little girl holding a sword cut him down. Was that normal? Of course it wasn't. He wasn't stupid. He knew that the human and the little girl were definitely not ordinary people. It wasn't wise to continue fighting at a time like this. After all, the god race wasn't the god race of the past. Most of the time they had to keep a low profile. Lianwan glanced at Immorse but didn't say anything. Actually, this time she also hoped that the divine race could make a good change. To change the god race they had to be ruthless. Otherwise, the god race could only struggle at death's door. In front of the statue, a blood-red aura had appeared around Zhou Xian. At this moment, the aura he emitted was even more evil than the power of Moke. The divine blood art was actually a kind of demonic attack. After an unknown period of time, Zhou Xian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, the eye of Maku had turned red. Zhou Xian stood up. As he stood up, the aura around him flowed like blood. At this time, the God King softly said, "Your divine blood art has been successfully cultivated. You now have absolute control over your blood. You can use it or absorb it, but remember, don't easily enter the bloodthirsty state because your body isn't very strong. Once you enter the bloodlust state, it will be very difficult for your body to withstand the power of that blood." Zhou Xian bowed slightly to the God King. "Thank you, Senior." The God King said, "There's no need to thank me. I also have my own selfish motives. You now have the blood of the god race in your body. I hope you can lead the god race to continue on." At this point he paused and then said, "If possible, let her return to the god race one day." Zhou Xian nodded. "I will do my best." The God King nodded slightly. He spread his right hand. Suddenly a golden light came from the sky. The next moment, a golden sword with a sheath appeared in his hand. The God King's sword. The God King looked at Zhou Xian. "You should already know the secret of the soul-suppressing sword. Then do you know the secret of the God King's sword?" Zhou Xian hurriedly said, "Please enlighten me, Senior." The Divine King looked at the Divine Emperor sword in his hand. This sword was forged by the first Divine Emperor of the God race. Its blade was forged from blue crystal star metal and the bone of a golden divine dragon. Its hilt was forged from the stars, the sun and the moon, and its scabbard was forged from the blood of a golden divine dragon. At this point his right hand lightly flicked the Divine Emperor sword. Hum. A sword hum suddenly soared into the sky. In the next moment, under Zhou Xian's gaze, the sword turned into a sword light and flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, a golden dragon thousands of meters long appeared in the sky. The golden dragon looked down disdainfully at everything. "Zhou Xian," the God King said softly, "its soul is condensed from the dragon soul of the golden dragon, and this golden dragon was once the first divine beast guardian of the god race." At this point he looked at Zhou Xian. "Now you are its master." Zhou Xian said solemnly, "Senior, will it not obey me?" The God King shook his head. "No, its responsibility is to protect the god race and you shoulder the revival of the god race. Therefore it will only help you. With its help, if you encounter monsters in the future, it can directly suppress the opponent's bloodline. If you encounter a dragon, as long as the opponent hasn't reached the level of the golden dragon, it can directly crush the opponent's bloodline. It naturally restrains the dragon race whose bloodline is lower than its. When he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have thought of something and said seriously, "The world is vast and boundless. Even the divine gold dragon clan isn't considered to be at the top of the pyramid. Of course, in my knowledge, there are only a few demon beasts that can surpass them in terms of bloodline, and those demon beasts belonged to legends all those years ago. Even I have never seen one. In this era, it can't be said that there are no monsters that can suppress the golden dragon in terms of bloodline, but there are definitely very, very few." Xian nodded. "Understood." As he spoke, he waved his right hand. In the sky, the golden dragon swooped down, its powerful dragon might seemingly about to crush the earth. Powerful. This was Xian's first impression. The dragon might of this golden dragon was much, much stronger than his sword force. Xian looked up at the golden dragon expressionlessly and did not dodge. As for the dragon might, even though he felt like he couldn't breathe, he still forcefully endured it. At this moment, the golden divine dragon arrived above Xian's head. When it arrived above Xian's head, it had already transformed into a sword and landed steadily in front of Xian. The divine king's sword. Xian stretched out his hand to grasp the sword. With this grasp, a golden dragon flashed from the scabbard. At the same time, a sword howl and dragon roar shook the sky. Domineering. That was how Xian felt when he held the sword. At this moment he felt like he was the overlord of the world. Those who submit to me live and those who oppose me die. That was how he felt right now. What a great sword. Xian couldn't help but reveal a brilliant smile on his face. Meanwhile, the divine king said, "Do you know what's truly powerful about this sword?" Xian looked at the divine king and the latter said softly, "The soul of the golden dragon. The strength of the golden dragon." Xian was slightly puzzled. The divine king smiled. "Soul imprint." As soon as the divine king finished speaking, the golden dragon suddenly entered the space between Xian's eyebrows. In an instant, a powerful aura erupted from Xian's body. At this moment his body contained the soul of a dragon. Xian suddenly let out a furious roar, and a golden dragon silently appeared behind him. The divine king said in front of Xian, "Now that your soul has fused with the dragon soul, your soul is at least 10 times stronger than before. It can be said that you're basically immune to soul type and spiritual energy techniques. Besides that, with the dragon soul's blessing, your techniques and sword techniques will become several times stronger. You can feel it now." Xian closed his eyes slowly. At this moment he felt that his divine consciousness could sense everything within a radius of 500 miles. He could even sense an ant on the ground clearly. As if he had thought of something, Xian issued a command in his heart. In an instant, a long tree that was 500 kilometers away was pierced by a ray of light. 500 kilometers in an instant. At this moment Xian was slightly shocked. With this dragon soul he could truly take the head of an enemy that was 500 kilometers away in an instant. This dragon soul's blessing was too terrifying. Especially with the soul-suppressing sword, he was completely confident that he could instantly kill a manifestation realm powerhouse. Of course, he still wasn't confident against powerhouses like Master Painter and Endless Heaven. However, he was confident that he could fight them now. At this moment, Xian's expression suddenly changed. Soon, the dragon soul in his body returned to the sword. As soon as the dragon soul disappeared, he felt like he was collapsing and he almost collapsed. Xian looked at the divine king. The divine king said, "The dragon soul is much stronger than your soul. Your soul and body won't be able to withstand it for too long. 15 minutes at most. In this 15 minutes, you can use this dragon soul and dragon power to instantly kill everything in the world. Of course, don't encounter any particularly powerful enemies." "Dragon power?" Xian hurriedly asked, "Is this the power of a dragon?" The divine king nodded. "This sword also contains the power of the golden divine dragon. This power was used to stabilize the sword's blade and hilt. You can use this power as well. This power isn't any weaker than the power of Azura. Of course, your body still won't be able to withstand it for too long." "Body," Xian said solemnly, "how should I improve my body?" The divine king was silent for a moment and then he said, "If you want to improve your body, you have to go to a place." Xian hurriedly asked, "Where?" The divine king said softly, "The ancient devil clan." Xian's brows furrowed slightly. "The ancient devil clan?" The Divine King nodded slightly. In the past, the ancient Devil clan was a clan that was only inferior to the Divine clan and the Nether clan. Their strongest point was their body. Their body cultivation method was quite unique. Xian asked softly, "Do I have to go to the ancient Devil clan?" The God King nodded. "The ancient Demon clan should have declined by now. I just don't know if they've been exterminated. If they haven't, you can try your luck. As for whether or not you can obtain their fleshly body cultivation inheritance, that will depend on your luck." Xian nodded and said softly, "I have to try." The Divine King said, "You can go now. Remember, don't forget what you promised me." Xian earnestly said, "I will do my best." Since he was entrusted with a task, he had to complete it. Since Xian had received benefits from others, he naturally had to do his best to fulfill his promise. The Divine King nodded. "Go." Xian cupped his fists. "King, farewell." Saying so, he turned to leave. But not long after, he suddenly turned back to the Divine King. "But, Senior, how do I go out?" The Divine King waved his right hand, and in an instant Xian disappeared. As soon as Xian disappeared, the Divine King seemed to think of something and frowned. Then the Divine King's throne. Chapter 507. Divine King's Throne. Xian only thought of it after coming out. Divine King's Throne's grade was above Soul-Suppressing Sword and Divine Emperor Sword. What kind of heaven-defying effect did this throne have? Xian was looking forward to it. Seeing Xian come out, Lianwan quickly walked up to him. "You passed the trial?" Xian nodded, "Yes." Lianwan was stunned, then her expression became complicated. "Passed? A human passed the most difficult trial of the Protoss race." Xian looked around. "What happened?" Lianwan shook her head. "That little girl did it." "Little girl?" Xian was startled. Then he quickly understood who Lianwan was talking about. "Xiaoling, why did she come out?" At this moment, Emperor Hound said, "She came to find you. She chased that chair for 4 hours with that sword." Saying this, it looked at Xian. "She seems to know she's good at fighting. You better be careful." Xian. At this moment, Immorse suddenly said, "I don't believe you passed the trial of our Protoss race." Xian looked at Immorse. "You are?" Lianwan said, "Our Protoss race's imparting elder." Xian nodded, then looked at Immorse. "Do you need me to prove it to you?" Immorse looked at Xian. "Prove it to the old man." Xian smiled. "All right." Saying this, he opened his palm. The Divine Emperor Sword appeared in it. Seeing the Divine Emperor Sword, all the Protoss powerhouses' expressions changed. Immorse looked at the Divine Emperor Sword in disbelief. "No? How is this possible? Why would the Divine Emperor give his inheritance to an outsider?" Xian's smile gradually turned cold. Immorse was shocked when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly said, "The old man doesn't have any other intentions. He's just curious." Xian turned around and looked at Lianwan. "Summon all the God Clan people here, especially the young generation of the God Clan. All of them must be present." Lianwan hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned to leave. Xian looked at the God King's throne on the right. The God King's throne did not flee. He walked up to it and said softly, "If you don't want to follow me, you can leave." He naturally wanted to obtain this Divine King's throne. After all, it was a Dao realm level divine artifact. However, he knew that he couldn't force his way through an existence of this level. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know how he died from the backlash. The Divine King's throne did not respond. Xian smiled and said, "If you don't say anything, I'll take it as you agreeing to follow me." With that, he directly stowed the God King's throne into the World Prison Pagoda. Within the World Prison Pagoda, Xiaoling, who was holding the box and muttering to herself, had suddenly turned around, and her expression changed when she saw the World Prison Pagoda. A moment later, she immediately ran out, but it didn't take long for her to return. But this time there was a sword in her hand. The God King's throne was speechless. Outside the World Prison Pagoda, it didn't take long for Lianwan to arrive before Xian with a group of people. There were around 10,000 of them, and there were young and old amongst them. All the members of the God Clan were looking at Xian, and many of them didn't conceal their disdain at all. The Emperor Hound shook its head when it witnessed this scene. It was fine for a person to be arrogant. So long as one possessed sufficient strength, then one could be arrogant. However, if one was arrogant without strength, then one was an idiot. Especially when one was arrogant before someone stronger than one. Punish. The Emperor Hound knew that the God clan had to be ruthlessly punished. Only then might the God clan be able to. There was still some hope. Xian glanced at them and said, "I'm a human." An uproar swept through the surroundings when they heard this. Moreover, the disdain in the eyes of many members of the God clan wasn't concealed at all. Xian grinned, "But now I'm the king of your God clan." "On what basis?" Meanwhile, a man from the God clan walked forward, and he gazed coldly at Xian as he spoke with disdain. "On what basis does a human like you become the king of our God clan?" Xian gazed at the man. "I know that all of you look down on humans. Let me tell all of you that I don't want to make an example out of you, nor do I want to kill to establish my might. But if it's necessary, then I'll definitely do it. So it's best that all of you keep a low profile before me, otherwise." The man laughed coldly. "Otherwise what? You?" Suddenly the man's voice stopped abruptly and then his head fell off his neck. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. Everyone here was stunned. Xian grinned. "Otherwise, that's it." Not far away, Lian Wan'er looked at Xian without saying anything. "You dare to kill?" At this moment, a man suddenly walked forward and he glared at Xian. Just as he was about to say something, his head flew off in an instant. Everyone was speechless. Xian smiled. "Is there anyone else who wants to come out? Don't worry, my sword will guarantee a painless death." All the experts of the God clan glared at Xian, but they didn't dare to say anything. Xian walked in front of the group of God clan members and shook his head. "You're weak, too weak. It's fine if you're weak, but all of you are so arrogant that you look down on humans. Let me ask you, what right do you have to look down on humans? Do you know? Right now there are too many forces out there that can annihilate you." As he spoke, he pointed at a man from the God clan who was glaring at him. "Your eyes are filled with disdain and killing intent, but what can you do? Anger is the expression of the incompetent." As he said this, he looked around at the people of the God clan. "In front of me, you have no right to be arrogant. If you do, please defeat me and tell me with your actions instead of looking at me angrily like you are now." At this moment, a little girl walked out. She was not very old, around 14 or 15 years old, and she was very beautiful. It should be said that the women of the God clan were all very beautiful. The little girl looked at Xian. "Human, you're very strong, stronger than us. However, you're a human and we're the God clan. We don't need humans to tell us what to do." As Xian walked towards the little girl, the expressions of the God clan experts changed, and they all stood in front of the little girl. At this moment, the little girl walked out. "No need, I'm not afraid of him." As she said this, she looked straight at Xian without a trace of fear in her eyes. Xian walked in front of the little girl and smiled. "If I want, I can kill all of you now." As he spoke, he gently pinched the little girl's cheek. "See, I can still do whatever I want." The experts of the God race were infuriated. One of the old men was about to attack when a sword was pressed against the center of his forehead. Thus no one dared to move again. The little girl looked straight at Xian. She just looked at him. Xian smiled and said, "Do you understand?" The little girl looked away and fell silent. Xian squatted in front of the little girl. "I have to admit that the God race was very strong in the past, but that was in the past. Moreover, that strength has nothing to do with you. The God race was strong in the past because the God race was very strong. But now you are very weak and yet you refuse to admit it. The glory of the God race in the past is not something you can be proud of now. Right now, all of you can do is use the formation to prolong your existence. Proud?" When he spoke up to here, he glanced at the others and said, "Tell me, what do all of you have to be proud of? I'm so outstanding. Am I proud? I have everything. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. If you're not proud, what right do you have to be proud?" The corners of the Emperor Hound's mouth twitched. Even Wanner's expression was somewhat strange. At this time, the little girl looked up at Xian. "You want to be the God race's king?" Xian nodded. "Yes." The little girl said, "But you're not from the God race." Xian smiled and then said, "Let me ask you, do you want to prolong your existence like this, or do you want to revive the God race?" The little girl looked at Xian and said, "Revive the God race." Xian said in a low voice, If you want to revive the Protoss, you have to go out and meet the forces out there. You have to see how strong they are. And you have to learn. You have to learn from humans and other clans. The little girl said in a low voice, "Are the humans outside as powerful as you?" Yi Xian looked at the little girl. "No, there are many people outside who are weaker than me, but there are also many who are stronger than me. There are many who are much, much stronger." At this time a man suddenly said, "Dan, don't listen to him. He's a human, he can't be trusted." The little girl called Dan, looked at the man, "Then you defeat him." The man's expression suddenly became somewhat ugly. Yi Xian looked at the little girl with some surprise. He realized that this little girl's position in the god race was not simple. Dan turned to Yi Xian and said, "Why do you want to help the god race?" Yi Xian smiled and then pointed at the emperor hound lying not far away. "There are 3 reasons. First, it is my friend. It wants me to come to the god race and be on good terms with the god race. Second, I have received benefits from the god race. I promised that senior that I would help the god race. Third, I also hope that the god race can become stronger so that we can have a powerful ally." Dan looked at Yi Xian and then walked in front of the emperor hound. The emperor hound looked at Dan in front of it and did not speak. Dan looked at the emperor hound. "You are the emperor hound, right?" The emperor hound was slightly surprised. "You know me?" Dan nodded. "You are the divine beast protector of my god race. All those years ago you fought for my god race until the end. Even though I don't know where you went in the end, it's all thanks to you and those divine generals that the members of the god race are still alive." The emperor hound fell silent. Dan suddenly glanced at Yi Xian and said, "He's a human. Since you're by his side, it's obvious that you trust him. Can we trust him as well?" The emperor hound nodded slightly. Yes. He really trusted Yi Xian. Perhaps Yi Xian would play dirty tricks against his enemies, but it had never seen Yi Xian play tricks against his own people. Dan nodded slightly. "I understand." As she spoke, she turned around and walked over to Yi Xian, and then she knelt down slowly. "I'm willing to appoint you as the king of the god race." The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Meanwhile, even one had knelt down slowly as well. It didn't take long before more and more people knelt down. At this moment, the divine king's throne suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Unlike before, there were 2 large golden words hovering above the throne this time. Yi Xian. As soon as Yi Xian sat down on it, something strange happened. With him as the center, all the spiritual energy within a radius of 50,000 kilometers suddenly vanished. P.S. Recently I've encountered a disgusting incident. My pen name has been registered as a trademark. It's not just me, many other authors have encountered the same thing. If the other party succeeds in registering it, it means that this name isn't mine anymore. If I write books or publish anything else using this name in the future, it might be against the law. I want to curse someone. The other party is registering trademarks in batches, and many web authors have had their trademarks registered by them. This is really the behavior of bandits. Right now, I'm also looking for information to protect my rights, but I know it's very, very difficult. It's extremely difficult for an individual to protect his rights in the country. If it comes to that, I'm prepared to cry. I'll cry until I die. I'll move them. End of this chapter. Chapter 508. Yi Xian was taken aback by what he had seen. He hurried to get down from the tree. Even one and the others had solemn expressions. Yi Xian looked at the Emperor Hound. "What happened just now?" The Emperor Hound said solemnly, "Dao Law." "Dao Law?" Yi Xian was stunned. "That's a Dao Law?" The Emperor Hound nodded. A divine artifact that has reached the Dao realm has its own Dao Law. The Divine King's Throne's Dao Law is the Spirit Restriction Dao Law. Once activated, it can instantly absorb all the spirit chi it covers. Saying this, it looked at Yi Xian. If you sit on it, you can instantly absorb all the spirit chi in a radius of 100,000 kilometers for your own use. Monstrous. That was Yi Xian's first thought. With this thing, didn't it mean that he wouldn't need spirit chi? Not only that, but it also meant that his opponent wouldn't have spirit chi to use. It was too monstrous. Yi Xian seemed to think of something and hurriedly asked, "I also have Dao laws." Dao laws. He had 3 Dao laws in his body. Although they were powerful apart from the Dream Dao Law, the other two Dao Laws were also powerful, but they weren't as monstrous as the Spirit Restriction Dao Law. The Emperor Hound said softly, "Your three Dao Laws are actually stronger than the Spirit Restriction Dao Law. However, you can't truly unleash their power. As for the Spirit Restriction Dao Law, you can unleash at least half of its power through the Divine King's throne. In short, it's very heaven-defying." Xian nodded slightly. Actually, if he could unleash half of the power of the Grand Dao Law and Space Dao Law, they would definitely be more terrifying than the Spirit Restriction Dao Law. After all, these two Dao Laws were from the Prison Pagoda. However, the Spirit Restriction Dao Law was also very monstrous. Xian put away the Divine King's throne. At this moment he realized that the surrounding Protoss experts were looking at him differently. Divine King's sword. Divine King's throne. These two Protoss supreme treasures were in Xian's hands. What did this mean? It meant that Xian had passed the Protoss trial. At this moment, there was no longer any disdain in the eyes of the Protoss. There was only a complicated expression. Xian looked at Danner in front of him. "What cultivation level are you at now?" "Fortune realm," Danner said. Xian was stunned. Danner looked at Xian and repeated, "Blessed realm." Xian turned to look at Lian Wanner. Lian Wanner said in a low voice, "Danner has a divine root. He is the most outstanding among the younger generation of our god race." The most outstanding person. Xian sized up Danner. Needless to say, this little girl wasn't bad at all. She was neither servile nor overbearing, and she was a promising talent. "What's next?" Lian Wanner suddenly asked. Xian said softly, "Contact the outside world." As he spoke, he looked at the divine race members in front of him. "Is there anyone from the younger generation who wants to go out and have a look?" Danner was the first to step forward. And at this time a youth also stood up. Soon more and more Celestials came out to fight. There were hundreds of young Celestials. Xian shook his head. "That's too many. I only need 10 people. Only 10 people can leave this place with me." "What?" Danner suddenly asked. Xian smiled. "The divine race isn't very strong right now. If you go out like this, you'll bring disaster upon the divine race. Do you understand?" Danner said softly, "Is the divine race really that weak?" Xian nodded. "You should go out and have a look. Experience the human race and the other races." Danner looked at Xian. "Will the divine race regain its former glory?" Xian swept his gaze over the crowd. "That's up to you. The future of the divine race isn't in my hands but yours." With that he looked at Lian Wanner. "Choose 10 of the most outstanding of the divine race's younger generation." Lian Wanner nodded. "All right." With that she turned to the group of youths. Before long 10 youths stepped forward, 6 men and 4 women. Including Danner, there were 11 in total. Xian looked at the 11 in front of him. "You are the most outstanding of the divine race. You will shoulder the heavy burden of the divine race's revival. The first step is to learn from the humans." At this time a man looked at Xian. "We won't be any worse than the humans." Xian walked up to the man. "What's your name?" The man looked directly at Xian. "Zhang Lianyue." Xian nodded. "I'm a human too. Do you think there's anything about me that you can learn from?" Zhang Lianyue looked at Xian in silence. Xian said, "Strength is everything. I'm stronger than you, so I'm worth learning from. Do you understand? In the outside world, I believe that there are many humans who are stronger than you, and there are even many who are stronger than me. I'll say it again. I'm so outstanding, but I'm not proud. What right do you have to be proud?" The crowd. Xian looked at Danner. "You're the big sister, right?" Danner nodded. "Yes." Xian said, "Now I'll give you a mission. Bring them to Xingwu City." Danner asked, "And then?" Xian smiled. "And then survive." Survive. It wasn't that easy to survive outside. He wanted these people to go to Xingwu City because he wanted them to change. He wanted them to change their views on humans and other races. If the divine race wanted to change, they had to change the younger generation first. Danner bowed slightly. "I'll bring them back alive." With that she turned to the 10 people. "Let's go." Just like that, Danner led the 10 people away. She left decisively. The remaining divine race people looked at Xian. Xian said softly, "As for you guys, just live well." With that he looked at Lian Wanner. Who's the strongest among the divine race now? Lianwana looked at Master Mo. Master Mo's expression was ugly. Xian looked at Master Mo. After a moment of silence he said, "Continue to hide this location with the Great Array. Don't let the outside forces know about this place. Otherwise, the divine race was too rich. If the outside forces knew about this, the divine race would be finished." Lianwana said in a low voice, "Will you leave?" Xian nodded. "I'm going to the ancient demon race. But don't worry. If anything happens here you can inform me at any time. Also the divine race needs to develop. The entire race needs to develop. We can't just eat and wait for death here. Especially since the divine race has so many treasures, but you guys don't have the strength to match them." Lianwana nodded. "I know." With that she looked at Xian. "What I want to know is, can the divine race really rise again?" Xian said softly, "That depends on the younger generation of the divine race." Lianwana walked over to Xian and looked at Xian. "Depends on you." Xian looked at Lianwana. Lianwana looked back at him. "If the divine race wants to leave this place, then it depends on you. The entire divine race has already followed you. In the future we will share both honor and disgrace with you. If you are disgraced, then the divine race will be disgraced. If you are honored, then the divine race will be honored as well." All the members of the divine race were looking at Xian. The Emperor Hound was looking at Xian as well. Xian fell silent for a moment before he said softly, "So long as I'm alive, no one can bully the divine race." A smile appeared on Lianwana's face, and then she slowly knelt down in front of everyone. "Greetings, Divine King." The other members of the divine race slowly knelt down as well. This time they truly acknowledged Xian. Xian fell silent. At this moment he truly felt pressured. He was in charge of the entire divine race. Of course it was his responsibility. After all, he'd obtained so many benefits from the divine race. Xian gazed at Lianwana. "Those 11 will give all of you a huge surprise in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around to look at the Emperor Hound. "Let's go." The Emperor Hound walked over to Xian. "Get up here." Xian was stunned and then he smiled. "Brother Emperor Hound, you're my friend in my heart." The Emperor Hound said, "I know. That's why I asked you to come up here." Xian smiled and didn't refuse. He immediately leaped onto the Emperor Hound's back, and it didn't take long for the Emperor Hound to bring Xian along and vanish into the boundless sky. Lianwana looked up into the sky and seemed to be lost in thought. Meanwhile, Immorse floated over to her and spoke softly. "Why did he pass the trial?" Lianwana spoke softly. "Do you still not understand? Our divine race needs a leader." Originally, Palace Lord Jian was the most suitable person to be the leader, but you should know that she would never return. Saying this, she looked up into the sky. And he should be the most suitable. Although his current strength isn't particularly strong with his talent and potential, it should only be a matter of time before he becomes a peerless almighty. At that time, our divine race will naturally have a way out by following him. Immorse shook his head. "I never thought that our divine race would fall to such a state," Lianwana said. "If Princess Jian was still in the divine race." Saying this, she didn't continue. Jian Zizai. Although this woman had slaughtered almost the entire divine race royal family and the strongest of the divine race back then, the descendants still couldn't hate her. Because the divine race had let her down first. If the divine race hadn't let her down with her there, the divine race would definitely have been able to survive that crisis. At his peak, Jian Zizai was truly invincible back then. If the divine race had her, they would definitely have been able to reach a higher level. Unfortunately, this woman had personally destroyed the divine race. This was the tragedy of the divine race. Beside Lianwana, Immorse smiled bitterly. "Princess Jian, I'm afraid she won't come back." Lianwana nodded. "No matter what, he is now the king of our divine race. Our divine race and him are bound together for good or ill. I have a feeling that he will be even better than Princess Jian back then." Immorse nodded. "I hope so." After Xian and the Emperor Dog left the divine race, they went straight to the ancient demon race. Right now his greatest weakness was his physical body. On the way, the Emperor Dog suddenly asked, "Kid, did you see the divine king?" Xian nodded. The emperor dog said in a deep voice. What did he say? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, he said he saw that I was talented and had amazing bones, a super monster rarely seen in 10,000 years. If I agreed to inherit the divine king's sword for him, he wouldn't let me go. Stop. The emperor dog suddenly said, my mouth is cheap, okay? Yi Xian. Chapter 509. Cheap Mouth. The emperor dog really could not stand Yi Xian anymore. When one was shameless, one was truly invincible. Hearing the emperor dog's words, Yi Xian laughed, then sat on the emperor dog's back and began to cultivate. Divine Blood Technique. Ever since cultivating this divine blood technique, he found that he had become very sensitive to blood. For example, at this moment he could actually feel the emperor dog's blood. If he wanted to, he could even control the emperor dog's blood. Strange. Powerful. The more he cultivated, the more Yi Xian felt that this divine blood technique was extraordinarily powerful. Apart from that, he now had the Divine King Sword and the Divine King Throne. The Divine King Sword could summon the dragon soul to possess the body and control the power of the Divine Dragon. The Divine King Throne could seal the world's spiritual energy and turn it into his own. Apart from that, he also had the soul-suppressing sword. And that wooden figure. That wooden man's strength was also very formidable. He now had a lot of external objects and each of them was heaven-defying. The more this was so, the more vigilant he became. Because many times, people would unknowingly develop a dependence. The more external objects he had, the more he had to focus on cultivating himself. He was now at the Nether Passage realm and above him was the 10,000 Arts realm. His current goal was the 10,000 Arts realm. 10,000 Arts realm sensing the world. Yi Xian calmed down and focused, quietly sensing everything around him. The emperor dog did not disturb Yi Xian and even slowed down. Somewhere in the darkness, an old man hid in the void. He looked down at Yi Xian and the emperor dog with cold eyes. At this moment, the old man suddenly turned his head to the right. Who? Kiki. A cold voice suddenly sounded and soon, a red shadow appeared not far to the old man's right. The old man frowned slightly. Who are you? The red shadow laughed sinisterly. I didn't expect the dignified deputy sect master of the order sect to secretly follow someone. The old man glanced coldly at the red shadow. Where did this rascal come from? As his voice fell, he flicked his right sleeve. Boom. The space where the red shadow was instantly shattered, but the red shadow suddenly appeared not far behind him. The old man frowned slightly and slowly clenched his right hand. The red shadow laughed. Want to kill me? Unless your Star Lord personally arrives. Of course I can't kill you either. The old man was expressionless. Your target is also that Yi Xian. The red shadow said, nonsense. If it wasn't for that treasure, why would I follow a little brat? The old man said indifferently, he's right below us and he's only in the Nether Passage realm. If you make a move, you can definitely kill him in an instant. The red shadow chuckled, why don't you do it? The old man glanced coldly at the red shadow and didn't say anything. The red silhouette said with a smile, although your Star Master tried his best to conceal it, what happened in the never-ending starfield has already spread throughout the all-heaven starfield. Someone who can make your Star Lord lose an avatar is not simple. The elder turned his head and looked into the distance. In his line of sight, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound were already walking further and further away. At that moment, the red silhouette said, as far as I know, there seems to be a mysterious expert behind Yi Xian, and this mysterious expert seems to be a swordsman, right? The old man said coldly, you must not be an ordinary person to dare to compete with the Order sect. Why don't you tell us who you are? The red silhouette said with a smile, guess. The old man said indifferently, cowardly rat. With that, he turned and chased after Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound in the distance. At that moment, the red silhouette suddenly laughed and said, Yi Xian, someone is following you. The voice was like thunder and it instantly spread to the ends of the world. In the distance, the old man suddenly stopped and turned to look at the red silhouette with a fierce expression. You deserve to die. The red silhouette laughed, turned and disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound suddenly stopped. On the back of the Emperor Hound, Yi Xian raised his head and looked around, but he didn't see anything. Who's talking? The Emperor Hound asked. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't know. With that he closed his eyes. At the same time the dragon's soul suddenly entered his body. In an instant Yi Xian's divine sense was like a piece of paper that covered the surrounding world. A moment later, Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at the void on the horizon. In the void the old man's expression changed and he looked down at Yi Xian. However, at that moment Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound had disappeared. Seeing this, the old man flew into a rage. Damn it! Yi Xian had run away. The old man's face turned green with anger. As if he had thought of something, his expression suddenly became solemn. How did Yi Xian find him? The old man looked down and frowned. In that instant Yi Xian was looking at his current position. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for Yi Xian to find him. Moreover, why had Yi Xian suddenly disappeared? It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. After a long time, the old man glanced coldly at the surroundings, and then he turned and disappeared. Somewhere on the ground below Yi Xian looked up into the sky. Who's following me? The Emperor Hound said solemnly. It might be because of that treasure of yours. Yi Xian nodded. Probably. The Emperor Hound said, from now on, you should be more careful. Yi Xian said softly, they won't give up on me. The Emperor Hound said, of course. Since you have that treasure, you should be prepared to face an endless stream of enemies. Yi Xian smiled. Let's go. To the ancient devil clan. Soon the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian vanished not too far away. In the void the old man didn't give up and continued to search. Along the way his divine sense constantly swept the ground below. However, Yi Xian seemed to have really vanished. He couldn't find even a trace of his aura. The old man frowned. How is this possible? As he spoke he directly landed on the ground. At that moment he was in a dense forest. The leaves around him were so dense that even the wind couldn't pass through. This was the place where Yi Xian had disappeared. The old man glanced around. It was extremely quiet and there was nothing around. Just as he was about to leave, his expression suddenly changed. He slammed his right hand forward. Boom. In an instant, with him as the center, the trees within a radius of 100 zhang were instantly turned to dust. At the same time the ground collapsed layer by layer. The moment his palm landed, a figure flew out in front of him. This figure flew more than 1,000 feet before finally crashing heavily onto the ground. This figure was Yi Xian. At that moment Yi Xian's body had collapsed, and his soul was rapidly dissipating. The old man's lips curled into a mocking smile. You really overestimate yourself. Someone like you. As he spoke, his pupils suddenly constricted. No. As he spoke, Yi Xian's soul, who was not far away from him, suddenly disappeared. However, the trees around him were still there and the ground did not collapse. The only difference was that there was one more person behind him. This person was Yi Xian. The old man looked in front of him in a daze. No. Bible. This is definitely impossible. As he spoke, a wound suddenly appeared on his throat and blood flowed out. His soul wanted to escape, but it seemed to be fixed in place within his body. This sword attack was a fatal blow from the body to the soul. Behind the old man, Yi Xian sheathed his sword and walked into the distance. However, soon he suddenly stopped. Do you want to know what that sword attack was called? The old man used his last breath to ask. What? What? Yi Xian paused slightly before saying, I'm not telling you. Haha. The old man spat out a mouthful of blood and died on the spot. P.S. Yesterday a reader added me on WeChat and said that I have a ticket, but I'm not giving it to you. Chapter 5:10. After Yi Xian absorbed the old man's soul with the soul-suppressing sword, he turned around and left. On the way Yi Xian was a little excited. Just now he'd used the Dream Dao Law to cast the Dreamland within a Dreamland. Fortunately he had used Dream within Dream. Otherwise he would not have been able to kill the other party with a single layer of Dream. Actually he was very clear that the old man's strength was much stronger than his. The reason why he was able to kill the old man was because he attacked first and ambushed him, as well as the old man's carelessness. If they were to fight head-on, his chances of winning were less than 30%. If he couldn't kill his opponent he would have to retreat. Of course, this referred to those who were much stronger than him. Now that he had the Dream Dao Law, the Space Dao Law, and the Soul-Suppressing Sword, he was confident that he could instantly kill a powerhouse who was much stronger than him. Moreover, it was an instant kill where even his soul wouldn't be able to escape. If many powerhouses reacted quickly, they could abandon their bodies to protect their souls. However, with the Soul-Suppressing Sword, it was impossible for the other party to protect their souls. Even if they could protect their souls, it would be easy for him to kill the other party. Because his sword skills and sword heavenly were the bane of soul bodies. The Emperor Dog suddenly said, "Kid, to be honest, I really admire you." On the back of the Emperor Dog, Xian was a little curious. "What do you admire about me?" The Emperor Hound said, "Treating a swordsman as an assassin. You're not just an ordinary person." Xian laughed. "Swordsman? What was the sword used for?" "Naturally, it was to kill. Assassins kill people, swordsmen also kill people. Is there a difference in essence?" In any case, in his eyes there was no difference. Not long after Xian and the monarch hound left, a red figure appeared. Looking at the old man's corpse on the ground, the red shadow was silent for a long time before softly saying, "What a monster." With that he disappeared. On the road, Xian suddenly asked, "Brother Emperor Dog, how is your strength recovering?" The Emperor Hound said, "He can already transform." Xian asked, "How strong is it?" The Emperor Dog said indifferently, "Guess." Xian smiled and said, "It should be a little stronger than before." The Emperor Hound said, "That old man you just killed, I can kill him head-on." Xian was speechless. The Emperor Hound looked into the distance. "How much longer until we arrive?" Xian said softly, "Soon." The ancient demon clan. When he came out, the Divine King had already told him where the ancient demon clan was. Of course, it wasn't the exact location but the general direction. Moreover, it was still unknown if any of the ancient demons were still alive. However, he still wanted to try his luck. His greatest weakness now was his physical body. If his physical body could be strengthened, his overall strength would increase by a large margin. Right now, his physical body was his greatest shortcoming. About 2 hours later, Xian and the Emperor Dog suddenly stopped. At this time they were already on a continent. On this continent, the spiritual qi was thin and the sky was gloomy. Xian looked around. "Is this where the ancient demons used to live?" The Emperor Hound said indifferently, "I don't know." Xian said, "Brother Emperor Hound, in any case, you are from the same generation as them, how could you not know?" The Emperor Hound said, "I haven't had any dealings with them, but the ancient demon clan's physical body is indeed unique." Xian looked around and said, "The ancient demon clan should have declined." The Emperor Hound said, "My divine clan and the Nether clan have fallen to such a state, what about them?" Xian said, "Come on, let's look around." The Emperor Dog nodded. Then it disappeared not far away with Xian. About half an hour later, Xian and the Emperor Hound arrived in front of an ancient city. The city was very large, but it was filled with an unpleasant smell of corrosion. Xian and the Emperor Hound entered the city. The city was extremely desolate and all sorts of weeds and vines grew all around. The Emperor Hound said, "There should be no one here." Xian nodded. He swept the surroundings with his divine sense, but there was no sign of life. A short while later, Xian and the Emperor Hound were about to leave. However, Xian suddenly turned around and disappeared in the next moment. Xian soon appeared in front of a great hall. The hall was covered in weeds and only the roof was visible. Xian waved his right hand and 2 flying swords flew out. It didn't take long for the weeds to disappear. After the weeds were cut down, a middle-aged man with a bare upper body was sitting cross-legged below. "Life?" Xian frowned slightly as he landed in front of the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's hair was draped over his shoulders, and his hands were placed on his knees. There was no aura coming from him. The Emperor Hound said in a low voice, "Dead?" Xian shook his head. "I don't know." As he spoke, he sized up the middle-aged man. "Senior." No response. Xian thought about it and said, "Hello, Senior. I'm Xian from the Firmament World. I've heard that the ancient devil clan's physical body is extremely powerful, so I've come to seek guidance." Still no response. Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, If Senior wants to leave behind the inheritance of the ancient devil clan, not choosing me would be the greatest loss to the ancient devil clan. The corners of the Emperor Hound's mouth twitched. This guy is in shameless mode again. However, the middle-aged man still didn't respond. Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, "Sorry for disturbing you." He looked at the Emperor Hound. "Let's go." The Emperor Hound was stunned. "You're giving up just like that?" Xian said, "What else can I do?" The Emperor Hound, Xian smiled. "Let's go." The Emperor Hound hesitated for a moment before it nodded, and then it left with Xian. "Human." Right at that moment, a voice suddenly resounded from behind Xian and the Emperor Hound. Xian turned around. In front of them, there was a soul floating in the air above the middle-aged man. It was the middle-aged man's soul. The middle-aged man looked at Xian, and then he tapped lightly with his right hand. This tap caused Xian to feel as if his entire body had been frozen in place. In the next moment, an illusory Xiaota appeared between Xian's brows. However, in the next moment, the illusory Xiaota suddenly trembled violently, and then a dazzling black light erupted from it. The middle-aged man's face fell and he smashed his fist down. Bang! The black light shattered and the prison pagoda returned to Xian's body. Xian retreated a few meters. He looked at the middle-aged man. At this moment, the middle-aged man's soul was becoming more and more illusory, and it had almost disappeared a few times. The prison pagoda had attacked. He hadn't been controlling the prison pagoda just now but the prison pagoda itself. Could it be that this fellow is about to wake up? He hadn't forgotten that the prison pagoda had a pagoda spirit. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Who exactly are you?" Xian looked at the middle-aged man. At this moment, the middle-aged man's expression was incomparably solemn. Xian spoke in a low voice, "Senior, don't act recklessly." In that instant just now, the middle-aged man had clearly noticed the prison pagoda, but the prison pagoda had counterattacked. The middle-aged man sized up Xian. "That thing isn't simple at all." Xian said, "Senior, I came here to learn the ancient devil race's Tao of the body." The middle-aged man fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "The inheritance of the ancient devil race is not passed on to outsiders." Xian nodded slightly, "I understand." As he spoke, he looked at the Emperor Hound. "Let's go. Let's go." The Emperor Hound nodded and then it was about to leave with Xian. However, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Human." Xian stopped and turned to look at the middle-aged man. The latter stared at him. "You have the Divine King Sword of the Divine Race and the Soul-Suppressing Sword of the Nether Race." Xian fell silent. How did this man see through my treasures? As if he knew what Xian was thinking, the middle-aged man explained, "This is an ancient secret technique of my ancient devil race, called the aura observation technique. It allows one to see through one's opponent and observe the phenomena of heaven and earth. In short, it has many benefits." Xian nodded slightly, "I understand." The middle-aged man said, "Since you obtained the soul-suppressing sword and the Divine King Sword, you must have seen the Divine King and the Nether King." Xian nodded, "I have." The middle-aged man asked, "Are they still alive?" Xian smiled bitterly, "I don't know." He really didn't know if the Nether King and Divine King were still alive. But according to his guess, they shouldn't be alive. Especially the Divine King. If he was still alive, he would definitely take care of the divine race. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged man asked softly, "Do you really want to learn my ancient devil race's Tao of the body?" Xian nodded, "I really want to." The middle-aged man said, "I have one condition." Xian said, "Please speak, Senior." The middle-aged man said softly, "Vengeance." "Vengeance?" Xian was stunned. The middle-aged man said, "The reason why my ancient devil race was destroyed in the past was not only because of our enemies, but also because of a traitor. If you want to obtain my ancient devil race's inheritance, you must promise to eliminate that traitor for my ancient devil race." Xian asked solemnly, "Is the traitor strong?" The middle-aged man nodded, "Very strong." Xian asked again, "How strong?" The middle-aged man said, "It's better if you don't know." Xian, the middle-aged man said, "It's your choice. Moreover, if you accept the ancient devil race's inheritance, Even if you don't kill her, she will kill you. But Xian was puzzled. The middle-aged man said softly, because she wants the ancient devil race to die. Xian was stunned, then said, she is also from the ancient devil race? The middle-aged man nodded. Xian was puzzled, then why? The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, then said, she secretly married the enemy of my ancient devil race. When the clan leader found out, he executed her son and daughter on the spot. At this point his expression became a little unnatural. Xian was also a little speechless. This is the second Jianzizai. No different from Jianzizai, this is even more ruthless, directly exterminating my entire race. But then again, if it were me, I would also do the same. I will never allow anyone to hurt my family. Xian looked at the middle-aged man. Senior, forgive me for being blunt, this is your clan leader's fault. The middle-aged man nodded. It's a little unjust, but she caused the death of my entire race. As he said this, he looked at Xian. If you want the ancient devil race's inheritance, you have to promise me that you will get rid of her. Xian shook his head decisively. I'm sorry, I don't want the ancient devil race's inheritance anymore. The middle-aged man asked, why? Xian said, because I think what she did was right. If it were me, I would do it even more ruthlessly than she did. After saying this, he turned and left. Just as Xian and the Emperor Hound were about to leave, a loud laugh suddenly sounded from behind him and the Emperor Hound. Hearing this laughter, Xian felt a little creeped out. That was because the laughter belonged to a woman. Chapter 5:11. A woman's voice. Xian turned around. Behind him, the middle-aged man's soul had disappeared and was replaced by a woman. It was a woman wearing a long red dress. The woman's hair draped over her shoulders and she exuded a vicious aura. Xian looked at the middle-aged man sitting cross-legged on the ground. He died at Senior's hands? The woman in red sneered. You have a problem with that? Xian frowned. Did this woman eat gunpowder? Next to Xian, the Emperor Hound looked at the woman in red, ready to attack. The woman in red looked at the Emperor Hound. I didn't think that the dignified guardian beast of the divine tribe would follow a human. The Emperor Hound said indifferently, none of your business. The woman in red's eyes turned cold and in the next moment she disappeared. The moment the woman disappeared, the Emperor Hound also disappeared. At the same time, Xian pointed with his finger and two flying swords crisscrossed in the air. Boom boom. A breath later, the scene returned to normal. The woman in red had returned to her original position and the Emperor Hound had retreated to Xian's side. The woman in red looked at Xian, her face cold. Xian was expressionless. We don't want to know about the ancient demon tribe's grievances. We came here to obtain the ancient demon tribe's inheritance. The woman in red sneered. The ancient demon tribe is extinct. Xian was silent for a moment and then nodded. Sorry for disturbing you. With that, he turned and left with the Emperor Hound. At this moment, the man sitting on the ground with his legs crossed suddenly opened his eyes. The next moment he suddenly dashed forward. Xian suddenly turned around. When he was about to attack, a voice rang in his head. Don't resist. As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed his finger out. In an instant, a beam of white light disappeared between Xian's eyebrows. Soon, countless pieces of information flowed into Xian's mind. Inheritance. The ancient demon tribe's inheritance. Not far away, the woman in red's expression suddenly changed and in the next moment she seemed to have gone mad. You're not dead. As soon as she finished speaking, she charged directly towards the man and Xian. Xian said, Brother Emperor Dog, stop her. As soon as Xian's voice fell, the Emperor Hound dashed out. The red-dressed woman roared, Scram. However, the Emperor Dog Bird ignored her. Soon, the Archhound and the red-dressed woman started fighting. On the other side, countless pieces of information flowed into Xian's mind. All of them were the inheritances of the ancient demons. Just like that, after about a quarter of an hour, the middle-aged man stopped. Xian looked at the middle-aged man who was sitting on the ground. He looked at Xian and said, The inheritance of the ancient demon clan is all here. Xian asked in a low voice, Has the ancient demon clan really been wiped out? The middle-aged man nodded. Xian looked at the woman not far away. He did it. The middle-aged man shook his head. Not entirely. She's also a pitiful person. Then he looked at Xian. The strongest part of the ancient demon's inheritance is the physical cultivation method. However, it is not easy to cultivate the physical body. You must be mentally prepared. Xian nodded. I understand. The middle-aged man turned to the red-dressed woman and said, "Spare her life." Xian nodded. "I'll try my best." The middle-aged man looked at Xian and said, "Let's go." Xian bowed to the middle-aged man and said, "Thank you very much." He looked at the Emperor Hound in the distance and said, "Brother Emperor Hound, let's go." In the distance, the Emperor Hound's body trembled and it retreated to Xian's side. The red-dressed woman did not intend to give up and was about to attack again when the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Suong." The red-dressed woman stopped and turned to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man said softly, "It was all because of me. Didn't you want to kill me? Come." The woman in the red dress floated directly in front of the middle-aged man. She suddenly slammed her palm towards the middle-aged man's head, but stopped a few inches away from his head. The red-dressed woman glared at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man looked at the woman and chuckled. It would have been great if he hadn't appeared. The red-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man and said, "You killed him." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "I don't regret it." The red-dressed woman's face gradually became ferocious. The middle-aged man's smile did not diminish. "If I could do it all over again, I would still kill him." The red-dressed woman suddenly stopped and turned to leave. The middle-aged man said, "Don't provoke him. He not only has the Divine King sword but also the soul-subduing sword and that mysterious thing." The woman in the red dress stopped in her tracks and turned around to look at the middle-aged man. "Although we were engaged back then, you know that I've never liked you." The middle-aged man chuckled. "I know, but without him you would have married me, right?" The red-dressed woman was silent. The middle-aged man said softly, "He didn't love you as much as I did." The red-dressed woman slowly closed her eyes. "To me it's a burden." The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. "Yes, you don't like me. No matter how much I like you, this love is a burden to you." The red-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man. "I want every member of the ancient demon clan to die and disappear from this world." The middle-aged man said softly, "He's not simple. If you go, you'll only be digging your own grave." The red-dressed woman said fiercely, "I'll die with him." The middle-aged man looked at the red-dressed woman with a complicated expression. "You've always felt that our clan has let you down. But have you ever thought about how the person you love treated the ancient demon clan? And him, when he killed the members of our ancient demon clan, did he show any mercy? And clan leader, you fell in love with our mortal enemy and protected him. Have you ever thought about how he felt? Didn't he do many things for you back then? And have you ever thought about your brothers and sisters? Your younger brother died in their hands. Also, have you ever thought about me? You and I were engaged, but you still chose him. Have you ever thought about my feelings? Have you ever thought about my clan's situation?" The red-dressed woman shouted angrily, "I don't care about that." The middle-aged man shook his head. "You're too selfish. You don't care about anyone but him." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand. With this wave, an invisible force directly locked onto the woman in red. The red-dressed woman tried to break free but failed. The middle-aged man said softly, "He has the ancient demon clan's inheritance. It's the only inheritance. I can't let you hurt him." As soon as she finished speaking, the red-dressed woman's body actually began to gradually turn illusory. The red-dressed woman shouted angrily, "Let me out." The middle-aged man ignored the red-dressed woman. He took out a hairpin and looked at it with an infatuated look. Not far away, the red-dressed woman shouted angrily. The middle-aged man ignored the red-dressed woman. His body became more and more illusory. On the other side, Xian and the monarch hound left the ancient demon clan. On the way, the monarch hound said, "That woman is crazy." Xian laughed. "When a woman goes crazy, she can be very abnormal." The monarch hound said softly, "Back then she..." At this point it didn't continue. Xian knew that the monarch hound was talking about Jian Zizai. He found that not only did many gods not hate Jian Zizai, they even respected her. At this time, the monarch hound suddenly said, You've obtained the ancient demon clan's inheritance? Yi Xian nodded. Let's find a place to rest first. I need to organize those things. The monarch hound nodded. Not long after, Yi Xian found a mountain range. In front of a pool, Yi Xian sat cross-legged and began to organize the ancient demon clan's inheritance in his mind. This time he had obtained many inheritances, but there were very few that were truly useful to him. What he lacked the most was his body. As for martial arts, although the ancient demon clans were powerful, they weren't suitable for him. What was more suitable for him was the cultivation of the body. Invincible tyrant body. This was the supreme cultivation method of the ancient demon clan. If he successfully cultivated it, his body would enter the tyrant body state. In this state, his body would be close to invincible and could withstand all secret techniques. It was described to be very powerful, almost invincible. However, Yi Xian knew that no cultivation method or sword technique was invincible. If he encountered a powerful opponent, he would still be finished. Of course, the strength of the ancient demon clan's invincible tyrant body was unquestionable. Yi Xian concentrated on studying the invincible tyrant body. After a while, he suddenly stood up. The monarch hound looked at Yi Xian and asked, "What are you doing?" Yi Xian said excitedly, "To cultivate the invincible tyrant body, I actually need the power of the earth." The invincible tyrant body was divided into 3 layers. Only by successfully cultivating all 3 layers could he activate the invincible tyrant body state. And to cultivate the first layer, he needed the power of the earth. The power of the earth. The monarch hound was stunned and then said, "You can control the power of the earth?" Yi Xian nodded. "Absorb the power of the earth to strengthen my body." After saying that, he directly began. It didn't take long for the power of the earth to converge towards him. As the power of the earth grew, Yi Xian's body gradually started to change. Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn, because he noticed that after he circulated the invincible tyrant body, his body actually started to devour the power of the earth. In other words, he wasn't using the power of the earth, but devouring it. Countless flowers and trees around him were withering at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Moreover, the pool beside him had dried up. Yi Xian looked at the monarch hound. The monarch hound fell silent for a while and then said, "Cultivation is about seizing the fortune of the world. When a cultivator starts to cultivate, he or she is fighting against the heavens and all living things. If you don't fight, you will die. Cultivation is about going against the heavens." Yi Xian was silent where he was. Cultivation was about going against the heavens. He'd heard this countless times. As the monarch hound had said, humans were fighting against the heavens from the moment they started cultivating. If you don't fight, you will die. After a while, Yi Xian took a deep breath. He looked up at the horizon and said softly, "Going against the heavens." As he spoke, he continued to absorb the power of the earth around him. Mercy? Yi Xian would not pretend to be merciful. Because absorbing spiritual energy was also destroying the world. If he really wanted to be merciful, then he shouldn't even absorb spiritual energy. He only knew that if he was weak, he would be beaten. So he had to become stronger. P.S. Asking for votes. Am I too thick-skinned? Chapter 5:12. Around him, endless power of the earth flowed into his body. After devouring this power of the earth, his body began to tremble violently. The Emperor Hound's expression was grave. Yi Xian devouring the power of the earth was dangerous. Devouring was different from using it. If he devoured, Yi Xian's body could not bear it and he might explode. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. As soon as he stopped, a powerful force swept out of his body. The Emperor Hound asked quickly, "How is it?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't dare to continue devouring." Devour. He devoured more and more power of the earth, to the point that his body could not bear it anymore. The Emperor Hound nodded. "Don't be too hasty." Yi Xian said softly, "Indeed." He realized that on the path of cultivation, one could not be too hasty. He had been too hasty just now. The Emperor Hound said, "Take your time." Yi Xian nodded, then looked up at the horizon and said softly, "To Shenwu City." The Emperor Hound nodded. "Yes, it is time to go to Shenwu City." Yi Xian smiled. "I wonder how they are." Let's go. After saying that, he jumped onto the Emperor Hound's back. The Emperor Hound soared into the sky and disappeared into the horizon. On the way, the Emperor Hound said, Shenwu City is a place where monsters gather. Yi Xian nodded. Wuxia seems to have gone to Shenwu City too. Wuxia. The Emperor Hound said, if that guy also went, it will be lively there. Yi Xian smiled. Indeed, I am looking forward to it. Shenwu City. And Lanqiu Lian Wanli Wuxia Ling. So many familiar people. Yi Xian laughed. Brother Emperor, hurry up. The Emperor Hound leaped and disappeared into the horizon. Not long after Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound disappeared, a red figure suddenly appeared. The red figure looked at the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian in the distance and said softly, Shenwu City. I am afraid you will not reach Shenwu City. Divine Martial City. That was a forbidden place. Once Yi Xian entered the Divine Martial City, even the Star Lord wouldn't dare to touch the Divine Martial City. Therefore, those who wanted Yi Xian's treasures would definitely make their move when Yi Xian entered the Divine Martial City, because this might be their best chance to strike. In the same place, the Red Shadow said softly, what a headache. When he saw Yi Xian kill that old man from the Order Gate, he was actually a little hesitant. He was hesitating whether or not he should continue targeting Yi Xian, because Yi Xian was too monstrous. Moreover, Yi Xian's current strength was already a little overpowered, and there was a mysterious expert behind him. If things went wrong, not only would he not be able to obtain the treasure, he would even invite disaster upon himself. However, he was unwilling to give up just like that. Because of Yi Xian's treasure. Enter the fifth dimension. This was a temptation that no expert could resist. Rumor had it that after entering the fifth dimension it would be a whole new world. One could break through one's bottleneck and live forever. As long as it was an old monster-level expert, no one could resist this temptation, because this might be their last hope. After a while, the Red Shadow said softly, we have to take a gamble. Otherwise, how would we be any different from a salted fish? After saying that, he disappeared. One day later, on the Imperial starship in the boundless starry sky, Yi Xian looked at the distant starry sky and said softly, we will enter the Divine Martial Star Field in half a day. Speaking of this, he seemed to have thought of something and frowned slightly. Stop. With that, the Imperial starship stopped. The Emperor Hound looked at Yi Xian. What is it? Yi Xian said softly, Brother D, enter the tower. The Emperor Hound said in a deep voice, what is it? Yi Xian looked around and said, the Divine Martial City is not a simple place. If we enter the Divine Martial City, those who want to kill me will not dare to act recklessly. So this might be their only chance. The Emperor Hound looked around. You're saying that someone might be following us? Yi Xian nodded. It's not a possibility. It should be 100%. As he spoke, he glanced around. The starry sky was silent and there was no one there. However, he knew that someone was definitely hiding in the dark. The Emperor Hound nodded and entered the prison pagoda. Yi Xian put the Imperial starship away and vanished nearby. Yi Xian didn't go directly to the Divine Martial City. Instead, he wandered aimlessly through the boundless starry sky. An hour later, Yi Xian suddenly entered a dead planet. In midair, Yi Xian glanced around. The spirit energy on this planet had dried up and it was a dead planet. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly, and then he transformed into a ray of light and vanished. Not long after Yi Xian vanished, a red shadow suddenly appeared. The red shadow glanced into the distance and said softly, did you notice? At this point he suddenly turned around and looked. There's someone else. There was still someone else. The red shadow turned to look at the place where Yi Xian had disappeared and chuckled. What a cunning fellow. With that he disappeared on the spot. A moment later Yi Xian entered the boundless mountain range. He didn't use the dragon soul to enhance his divine sense. If he used the dragon soul, the other party might also discover him if he discovered the other party. If it was just one person, he wouldn't mind. However, if there were many of them, he would be forcing the other party to make a move. Not long after, Yi Xian's speed suddenly soared. At this moment he directly used the Tao of Space to increase his speed to the extreme. In the blink of an eye, he used the chaotic qi to completely conceal himself. In the mountain range, Yi Xian sat quietly on a tree. Just like that, about an hour later, a black-clothed man suddenly appeared in the sky above his head. Xian remained calm and focused, motionless. A moment later, the black-clothed man suddenly disappeared. Not long after the black-clothed man disappeared, an old man suddenly appeared. The old man remained silent for a long time before leaving. Xian still didn't move. Not long after, a woman suddenly appeared not far in front of Xian. The woman wore a thin black chiffon. Her figure was excellent and her beautiful hair draped over her shoulders. As she had her back to Xian couldn't see her face. The woman suddenly leaned against a tree. She just leaned against it, showing no intention of leaving. In the dark, Xian's face sank. Just like this, the woman didn't show any intention of leaving until nightfall. A bright moon hung in the sky and the land was quiet. At this moment, Xian walked out from the dark. The woman chuckled. Finally willing to come out? With that, she turned to look at Xian. Xian looked at the woman. The woman was wearing a black veil and only a pair of eyes could be seen. Xian said indifferently, "You found me." The woman smiled without saying anything. Xian shook his head. "No, you know I'm here, but you don't know my specific location." The woman smiled. Young Master Ye's concealment technique is indeed strong. Unfortunately, young Master Ye's realm is a little low. Otherwise, I'm afraid we wouldn't even be able to catch up to young Master Ye's shadow. Xian walked in front of the woman. A straightforward person doesn't beat around the bush. "Are you here for that treasure?" The woman nodded. "Yes." "Not really." Xian smiled. "I'm a little interested." The woman looked at Xian. "I wonder if young Master Yi is interested in joining us?" Xian asked. "Join you?" The woman nodded. "As long as young Master Yi agrees, we will ensure young Master Ye's safety." Xian smiled. "What faction are you from?" The woman shook her head. "Sorry, I can't say for now." Xian thought for a moment. "It shouldn't be that simple for me to join you, right?" The woman smiled. "There is a small condition. That is, young Master Yi must hand over one soul and one spirit. Of course, we can guarantee that we won't harm young Master Yi. Not only that, we will also nurture young Master Yi." "Huh." Xian suddenly laughed. The woman looked at Xian. The smile on her face gradually disappeared. Right at this time, the woman's face fell and she slapped out fiercely. Rumble. This slap shattered the space in front of her. At the same time, she retreated frantically. At the moment she retreated, a sword slashed down at her nose. If she was just a little slower, her nose would have been cut in half. The veiled woman retreated until she was more than 300 meters away. As soon as she stopped, her expression changed again because two sword lights had appeared behind her. It was as if the two swords had been waiting for her. This sudden turn of events shocked the veiled woman. But she reacted extremely quickly. She spun around and pressed her palms together. She closed her palms together and the two swords instantly shattered. In her palms there were two swords. At the same time, the veiled woman turned around and charged forward. The space in her path collapsed inch by inch. Rumble. An explosion suddenly resounded in the distance and then a figure was blasted flying. It was Xian. In midair, Xian's body was collapsing inch by inch. The veiled woman gazed coldly at Xian. "You're still young." When she spoke up to hear, her expression changed abruptly. "No." As soon as she finished speaking, her throat split open. Everything in the surroundings suddenly returned to normal, and even the space that she'd shattered earlier had returned to normal at this moment. As to Xian, whose body had been destroyed, he was still standing in front of her. The veiled woman looked at Xian in disbelief. "How could you?" Xian did not speak. He took out a purple origin crystal and began to devour it. Dream. Just now he had used 3 layers of dream. However, the consumption of these 3 layers of dream was too great. It was so great that he almost could not hold on. In front of Xian, the veiled woman stared at Xian. "What did you do to me just now?" She originally wanted to abandon her body, but now she realized that she could not even move her soul. "What did I do?" Xian looked at the woman and smiled. "Guess." The veiled woman stared at Xian with some resentment. "You won't live for long. They won't let you go." Xian raised his hand and swung his sword. The veiled woman's head flew into the air. Blood gushed out like a fountain. At this moment the emperor dog suddenly said, "Boy, can't you show some mercy to the fairer sex?" Xian said indifferently. "She's not my woman. Why should I show mercy to her?" After saying that, he took the veiled woman's storage ring and disappeared not far away. Emperor dog. Chapter 513. In a certain cave, Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, crazily absorbing the purple Genesis crystal. Casting the 3 dream realms previously consumed too much of his energy. With his current strength he could only cast 4 dream realms at most. 4 dream realms, this was his current limit. Now he could easily kill a manifestation realm expert without the Divine King's sword or the Divine King's throne. The manifestation realm was no longer a threat to him. Of course he did not dare to be careless. After all, there were strong and weak manifestation realm experts. About 2 hours later, Xian's body had more or less recovered. He took out the veiled woman's storage ring, but when he scanned it with his divine sense he was stunned. Apart from a black token there was nothing else in the storage ring. He quietly headed to Divine Martial City. Divine Martial City. This time Xian chose to quietly head to Divine Martial City. He was not afraid of those people in the dark, but he did not want to be entangled with them because they were not the main characters. He only wanted to see his sister Yiling and the others as soon as possible. One day later, Xian finally entered the Divine Martial Star Field. Divine Martial Star Field. This star field was not big. In fact, it was very small. There was only one Divine Martial City. But this tiny Divine Martial City was an existence that many forces were extremely afraid of. Soon Xian saw an ancient city in the starry sky. The city was very big and he could not see the end of it. In the sky above Divine Martial City there were 2 huge statues. One was a woman with a spear and the other was a man with a sword. When he saw the man, Xian was stunned. Why did he look so familiar? At this moment there was a sudden change. The space in front of him suddenly split open, and then a huge chessboard flashed out. In the next moment he was surrounded by 4 chess pieces, 2 black and 2 white. Xian's face darkened. These people had discovered him. Right at this moment an old man suddenly walked out from the rift in space. The old man was just about to speak when Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and when he appeared once more he was already in front of the old man. At the same time there were 2 rays of light from the sword. Xian was holding the soul-suppressing sword. This time he did not hold back at all. The old man was a little stunned because he did not expect Xian to directly attack. It was this slight shock that allowed Xian to seize the initiative. However, the old man's reaction was not slow either. He turned his right hand into a palm and pressed it down lightly. Boom! A powerful force swept out from his body, and this force forcefully stopped Xian's 2 sword lights. Moreover, Xian himself was even shaken to the point of retreating explosively. A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of the old man's mouth when he saw Xian being blasted back. However, right at this moment his pupils suddenly constricted to the size of needles. In the next moment his head flew into the air. Behind the old man, Xian held the soul-suppressing sword and slashed down. The space was directly torn apart by the soul-suppressing sword. In the next moment he used the law of space to escape from the array formation. When he reappeared he was already thousands of feet away. Then he headed straight for Divine Martial City. But soon a spear suddenly pierced through the sky. Xian stopped and raised his head to look at the spear. The spear was like a bolt of lightning, extremely dazzling. At this moment, a sword light suddenly slashed the spear. Boom! The spear was forcefully stopped by the sword light. At this moment, a middle-aged man appeared above Xian's head. The middle-aged man held the spear and looked coldly at Xian. "You have underestimated." At this moment Xian suddenly shot up into the sky. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and stabbed down with his spear. Boom! The sword light shattered and Xian returned to his original position. Xian lowered his head and looked at his arm. At this moment his sword-wielding hand had cracked. He raised his head and looked at the spear-wielding man in the air. As he had expected, it would be difficult for him to kill these people who were a few levels higher than him if he did not launch a sneak attack. In the sky, the man in the field looked at Xian with vigilance. He didn't dare to be careless. From the moment Yi Xian instantly killed the old man, he had already treated Yi Xian as an opponent of the same level. Because his strength was not much different from the old man. The spear-wielding man looked down at Yi Xian. "Leave that treasure and you can leave." Yi Xian thought for a moment. Then he said, "Really?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't play tricks." Yi Xian shook his head. "I won't play tricks. If I give it to you, will you really let me go?" The man's face sank and he just stared at Yi Xian. His intuition told him that Yi Xian wouldn't hand over that treasure so easily. Yi Xian looked at the man. "You don't want it?" The spear-wielding man stared at Yi Xian. "You better not play any tricks." Yi Xian nodded. "I hope you keep your word." As soon as he finished speaking, an illusory Xiaota suddenly appeared between his brows. It didn't take long for the illusory Xiaota to leave the space between Yi Xian's brows. The man's gaze instantly burned with desire when he saw the illusory Xiaota. Meanwhile, Yi Xian said, "I'll give it to you. Farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and fled. He was the real deal. The imperial hound within the pagoda was stunned. Because Yi Xian had really put down the pagoda and fled. What's going on? The man was quite stunned as well. He really fled. He didn't think too much about it. His figure shook as he charged towards the pagoda. Right at this moment, a few formidable auras suddenly appeared here. A moment later, a world-shaking explosion resounded, and then the man was blasted over 1 kilometer away. At the same time, an old man, 2 black-clothed men, and a red figure had suddenly appeared around the pagoda. The man's face instantly became ferocious when he witnessed this scene, and then he charged over. The battle. It didn't take long for a few experts to start fighting intensely around the pagoda. Meanwhile, Yi Xian watched silently from a hidden spot. He was naturally not worried about the pagoda because he'd noticed that it was actually extremely terrifying. He'd shown some of its power in the ancient devil clan, and it was absolutely not something that a creation realm expert could resist. Moreover, if the pagoda really left, then it was a good thing for him as well. Because he didn't rely on the pagoda right now. Conversely, he had to be on tenterhooks at all times because of the pagoda, and he was deeply afraid that the 6th floor would escape at any moment. He'd rather face his enemies outside than face those fellows within the pagoda. Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and looked towards the distance. A few experts were engaged in a frenzied battle. Needless to say, all of them were extremely strong. If it was a sneak attack, then he was confident in his ability to instantly kill them. But if it was a head-on battle, then he didn't have much of a chance at victory. It couldn't be helped because their cultivations were much higher than his. Right at this moment, the man with the spear was blasted flying, and he flew over 3 kilometers away. At the same time, his entire left arm had vanished. The man's face was extremely unsightly. He glanced at the others in the distance, hesitated for a moment, and then chose to leave in the end. He'd lost the right to fight for the precious treasure. It didn't take long for the man to vanish into the distance. He suddenly stopped around 15 minutes later, and then a ray of light shot through the center of his forehead. The man's eyes opened wide as he stared fixedly ahead. Behind the spear-wielding man, Yi Xian put away his sword, and then put away the spear-wielding man's storage ring. Then he shook his body and directly disappeared not far away. Yi Xian returned to the battlefield. The pagoda was still there. And the pagoda was still there. A smile appeared on Yi Xian's face as he watched them fight, and then he just watched silently. Not long after, another person retreated from the battlefield and then Yi Xian vanished as well. He didn't move immediately because if he did, those people would definitely join forces to deal with him first. Therefore, he waited until the person who retreated was far away before he made his move. 1 strike to kill. The soul-suppressing sword combined with the Dream Dao Law and the Space Dao Law. The opponent's soul didn't even have a chance to escape. Now only 3 people were left fighting for the pagoda. An old man, a red figure, and a woman in a black robe. What surprised Yi Xian was that the woman was a swordsman and a powerful swordsman at that. Among the 3, the old man was the weakest. At this moment, the female swordsman and the red figure suddenly joined forces. The old man's expression changed greatly and he wanted to flee, but the woman in black robe's sword was faster and blocked him. Soon, only the red figure and the female swordsman were left beside the pagoda. The 2 of them didn't start fighting and they just stood there. At this moment the red figure suddenly said, "Come out. Come out." In the dark Yi Xian frowned slightly. Did the other party notice him? In the distance the red figure suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Seeing this, Yi Xian knew that the other party had really noticed him. Yi Xian didn't hide anymore. He walked out and grinned. "Hello, you two." The female swordsman coldly looked at Yi Xian and didn't say a word. Yi Xian also sized up the female swordsman. He had to admit that this female swordsman was very beautiful, but her eyes were too cold, not gentle at all. The red figure lightly smiled and said, "Are you trying to reap the benefits of a fisherman?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I've already taken out the pagoda. As long as the two of you have the strength, you can take it away at any time." The red figure smiled and said, "The two of us will fight to the death and then you can deal with us?" Yi Xian quietly sighed. "It seems that you two are prepared to join forces to kill me first." The female swordsman coldly looked at Yi Xian. The sword in her hand trembled as if it wanted to be unsheathed. The red figure suddenly said, "Yi Xian, we know that you're not simple. We just want to take this treasure, not to kill you. As long as you give up this treasure, we won't trouble you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "All right, I'll leave now." After saying that, he turned around and left. At this time, the female swordsman suddenly stood in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned around and looked at the red figure. "What else do you want? Are you going to let me live?" The red figure was silent for a moment and then said, "You're too treacherous. I really don't trust you, so it's better to get rid of you." After saying that, he directly rushed toward Yi Xian. Behind Yi Xian, the female swordsman suddenly unsheathed her sword. She was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye she arrived in front of Yi Xian, and then stabbed at Yi Xian's back. When she arrived behind Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Yi Xian did not dodge and let the sword stab into his abdomen. The woman was stunned. In the next moment the woman's throat suddenly split open, and Yi Xian appeared behind her. The woman's eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. Yi Xian turned around to look at the red figure, but at this time the red figure had stopped. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Why did you stop?" The red figure was silent for a moment, then said, "I didn't know you were so strong, sorry to disturb you." After saying that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian. P.S. I've been watching some TV series recently. All kinds of remakes, it's making me feel awkward. So, I went back to watching TV series from more than 10 years ago like Justice Bao. Why do I feel that the TV series from more than 10 years ago are so much better? You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.